with this next session. Our session is entitled Long-Term Support of Individuals Who Receive Neuroprosthetic Devices. And I'm pleased to introduce our moderator, a friend and colleague for many years. Ron Triolo is the Executive Director of the Advanced Platform Technology Center. He is a senior research scientist at the Louis Stokes Cleveland VA Medical Center, a tenured full professor in biomedical engineering at Case Western Reserve, and an expert in lower extremity prostheses. Dr. Triolo completed a postdoc in neural engineering at Case in 1987 and joined the faculty in 1994 when Hunter convinced him it was his idea and his best interests. That sounds like Hunter. And with that, I will ask Ron to continue to introduce the members of the panel. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Joe.
Is Hunter in the room?
He's not in the room yet. Oh, yes, he is, but he's not. He's talking in the back of the room like he usually.
Hunter, pay attention. Come on now. Sorry.
Good job.
All right, the first slide. All right. Well, thank you, Joe. As we've heard several times today, I was charged with talking about long-term support of individuals who receive neuroprosthetic devices during research trials. I wanted to begin by acknowledging members of the panel here. Jen French is the Executive Director and Founder of Neurotech Network, and is also past president and co-founder of North American SCI Consortium. She's the co-organizer of the Implantable BCI Collaborative Community, is a Paralympian, in case you don't know, and I'm only the messenger here, is better at the helm in Hunter's boat. Something about baby doll. I don't know what that means, but that's a private joke between she and Hunter. Yeah, she wrote it. We all know Kevin Kilgore. I don't think I have to go through this again. Kevin, we all knew who you are, and Joe's read this once already. Jen and Kevin will be speaking, but then we have a panel of discussants, including Graham Creasy, who will be joining us remotely. Graham's an SCI physician, recently retired from the Palo Alto VA and Stanford University. He was invited to Cleveland by Tom Mortimer in 1990, initially for 3 months, but ended up staying 18 years and working in the VA and Metro Health SCI units and the FES Center, mostly on neuroprostheses for bladder, bowel, and sexual function. Hunter was his formal mentor on a VA Research Career Development Award at a time when he should have been fully developed already, and has been a great friend to Graham for 45 years. Peter Gorman, you can raise your hand, Peter, all right, is a clinical professor in the Department of Neurology at the University of Maryland School of Medicine, chief of the Division of Rehab Medicine at the University of Maryland Rehabilitation and Orthopedic Institute. Peter's a former graduate student at the Applied Neural Control Laboratory under Tom Mortimer. You're catching a drift here, right? A connection. And a fellow in rehab medicine and FES at Metro Health way back when with Hunter and his colleagues. And finally, Kip Ludwig is an associate professor with the University of Wisconsin-Madison and co-director of the Wisconsin Institute for Translational Neural Engineering. All right, and I think that's about all the time we have. I don't know if you got to see this video, but it's that's a private joke between me and Hunter. We'll move on to the next slide, if we can. Is this? Oh, that would help. Turn it on. All right. So, how do we deal with this issue of long-term support for recipients of experimental neurotechnology? Hunter, to his credit, has instilled in our community a strong sense of value and commitment for access to recipients of neurotechnology, right? And as we heard earlier today in the user panel, some people for 20 or 30 years uniformly benefit and want to continue using these experimental systems for as long as possible. These include volunteers in our first-in-human early feasibility studies, participants in other pre-approval trials, and also maybe post-approval consumers of some commercial products. But what happens when the study ends? This can lead to something that's called abandonment. And this becomes abandoned technology. And keeping recipients of these experimental devices active requires repairing, replacing, or upgrading external components or internal components, which is not easy to do. All right? I wanted to shift gears a little bit to talk about abandonment just for a second. When I was co-teaching with Hunter, we had a section in undergraduate course where we went through predictors of technology abandonment. All right? That's not the abandonment we're talking about here. It used to mean users abandoning our beautiful technology. Why aren't you using this thing I made for you? Right? And this is still an active area of research, and as the user panel said earlier, and one thing Hunter was a genius at is putting the person in the center of the decision making, assessing the technology in usual environments. All these things are now codified and kind of part of the gestalt of our community. I think we understand, or at least beginning to understand, what it takes to have users accept an assistive technology. But again, that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about developers abandoning their users. That's the abandonment. That's when technology is abandoned, right? So maybe we've achieved acceptability, use, and value, but how do we sustain it? That's the major question, right? So some of this is familiar. The IST is on the upper left, but this is sort of a typical lower extremity neuroprosthesis. And when I say lower extremity, I mean anything from the armpits down, okay, including the trunk. Electrodes, this is beautiful. This stuff works, right? But life happens, right? There are dogs, cars, toilets, shotguns, bad parts, temperature swings, construction equipment, faulty manufacturing, and none of the use cases for the design of any of these things take all these factors into account. And this is what can happen. This is not something I staged. These are devices we've collected. An external controller, I think that was chewed by a dog with the coil. That implant that's supposed to last a lifetime is not supposed to bend that way. Our user found a way to do that. So what do we do when this happens? Well, first of all, we have about 24 users of these lower extremity systems, and we effect repairs or replacements about twice a year for each of those recipients, okay? So that takes time and money. We also keep a supply on stock, backups, and it depends on what the component is. A coil, maybe for every coil in the field, there's another coil on the shelf. There's 100% backup that we can just ship out. All right, again, money to keep the things in stock, time to build them, time to service them, right? For the implantable components, there's maybe an 80% 5-year electrode survivability, but that statistics lie, right? If you have an 8-channel system, if my conditional probability is right, that means there's about a 50% chance of one of them failing and having only 7 working after 5 years. So it's always a ticking time bomb. Life happens, as we heard, and life finds a way. All right, so the reason I started with that video clip is because I've kind of approached this as an exercise of swinging vine to vine. The Tarzan approach is what we can do as PIs, right? It's what Kevin does. In some extent, it's what Graham is doing. It's what we've been doing. And that means recipients re-enroll in a new study. You get a new grant, you test a new component, they re-enroll in another study. And this can go on until we retire or people move on to other opportunities. Technology becomes outdated and obsolete. All right, and these are all the challenges that remain that we have to deal with every day with this approach. So it's highly personalized and really unsustainable, so it's more a fallacy than an approach. All right, just postpones the solution. And I want to give one real-world example of this. This is a recipient of an original 8-channel standing system that lasted for a good 4 years before we had to replace 3 electrodes, which was okay because it was still under the original protocol and the original funding. All right, we got that funding renewed, then standing time started to decrease over the next 7 years, but we got 2 new grants, one for standing balance, which means more channels of stimulation, and one for nerve cuff electrodes. So that let us swing to another vine, right? This volunteer continued to actively contribute to these new projects, including trunk control, and then the ISD became intermittent, and we localized it to an internal component. We replaced it, and then obtained new funding that allowed us to put new nerve cuffs on the tibial and fibular nerves for another 3 years, until the IST became unresponsive again. And this is an Uber user, so this is being fully taxed. The system is being fully taxed and a highly active person. We replaced it. Unrestricted use continued, but just last year, we noticed 5 electrodes with altered responses. So we're looking for another vine. And the whole goal is to be Tarzan and not George of the Jungle, So we're trying to avoid those trees, not knowing where the next vine is coming from. So the question isn't whether we should do this, but how can we do it sustainably? This issue transcends Cleveland, as Jen is going to mention in her remarks, and also going to define how the community is defining abandoned technology. So it's a national issue, and it's not just us. I think maybe we're in the vanguard of sensitivity towards it, but it's not just us. The world is changing. It's especially acute for pre-approval studies, and that's what we'll mostly focus on, and maybe we'll hear the challenges to commercially available systems when companies make business decisions and devices go off the market, but we're leaving the bulk of that for another time. Kevin will talk about the challenges, regulatory compliance, obviously. Protocols and IDEs require constant care and feeding. Someone needs to write the grants, fund them, tolerate losses. If clinical activity is uncovered by insurance, people pursue new opportunities, develop other priorities, and technology advances, parts are discontinued, software goes unsupported. So we know the problems. And so Jennifer, this is how the rest of the day is going to go, the rest of the hour is going to go. Jen is going to comment on definition and size of the problem. Kevin is going to actually propose a potential solution. And then our panel is going, from their perspectives as clinicians and developers of technology, they're going to give their opinions based on their experience of this proposal and also their own insights. And then I'll have 1 or 2 brief, I promise, closing remarks. So, Jen?
Thanks, Ron. I got that. So, sorry, I hate speaking behind a table. It drives me bananas. But I think I can't advance the slides. Ooh. Ah, there we go. So, hi guys, it's after lunch. Is everybody awake? Are you? All right, good. At least I heard a little laugh out of you guys, so I know you're awake. So I want us to start to think about, we've been talking about all of the what's been happening here in Cleveland, but let's start to think about what happens outside of Cleveland. So for those of you who don't know me, I have a spinal cord injury. I was injured at the age of 26 from a snowboarding accident. Went down a 40-foot embankment, kissed a bunch of trees, came out quadriplegic. And yes, I'm using my hands, but I'm a C6, C7, so I'm not a candidate for your upper extremity. Sorry, Kevin. But I am a participant in the lower extremity system, and actually I was implanted 25 years ago. Is that crazy? But I want to reflect on this a little bit because on our fireside chat we talked a lot about neurocontrol, and which reminded me that I was actually at was it the Neuroprostheses workshop? Is that what it was called then? We were at the Neuroprostheses workshop when that news came out, and I was with Hunter in the sea of posters, and he was down on his knees explaining to me the trauma of neurocontrol going out of business. So I think that was a collective trauma for the entire community, and that emotion is not lost on me, Hunter. So I think as we start to think about abandonment, when we start to think about how we address this issue, it's going beyond Cleveland. 25 years ago, you guys were the pioneers in this space, but there are a lot more implanted devices, and there are a lot more people walking around with implanted devices today. And so the area and the awareness of abandonment is becoming much more not aware of, not only in the community, but also amongst the general public. And so when we start to think about solutions for this, we have to start to think about how is this resonating throughout our community and throughout our society. And this was a great paper that was written. It came out last year. It's called Moral Entanglement, and really looking at some of the 4 quadrants of abandonment and that ancillary care that comes along with implanted devices. You know, thinking about the participant vulnerabilities that we have when we join the trials and when we choose to be able to participate in trials. The relationships that we have with the researchers. What about that uncompensated risk and burden that the participants take on? But also, what about those dependent relationships that we have? So when we think about this moral entanglement, those of you who are implanting people with devices, you are going to confront this sooner or later in your career if you have not already. This is an interesting way to look at it. This was actually a DBS study that was taken out. This was the investigator side, looking at post-trial access. And for so many investigators, 95% agree that they have a moral obligation to help out their participants. And so many of them look at this needs to be not only in the informed consent, but it needs to be in a lot of other aspects that we start to talk about what happens when a trial is over with. But we also look at where the responsibilities are for those who are implanted. This was a study that was also done by another researcher with DBS specifically. And I want you to look at the graph that says that who has responsibilities after the trial is over with. So before people are implanted, they think their insurance company should. But after they're implanted, they think that it should be the device manufacturer's responsibilities. So I want you to start to think about the perspectives of not only those investigators, but also the participants. And when we start to think about the global area of abandonment, this was a paper that we published in JAMA last year, collectively led by Michael Aachen, about defining abandonment. So this paper actually goes into kind of the 4 quadrants of defining abandonment and looking at not only the responsibilities of clinical trials and when clinical trials are over with, but how do we address informed consent and what are those financial responsibilities that have to follow from abandonment. So I want us to start to think that this is not a Cleveland issue. This is a global issue, and there's a lot of initiatives going on to address this abandonment and this post-trial issue. So in the BRAIN Initiative, we have a working group called the NEUG, or the Neuroethics Working Group. We have whole sessions and whole subgroups that are working on the abandonment. You can click on this QR code to go see our latest discussions. We also published this paper last year from IEEE at Neuroethics about the funder's responsibility for support and what that should be and how funders can influence the ethical ways that we do implanted devices going forward. But also there's policy support. This was put out in December by the GAO, the Government Accounting Office, So this was directed for BCIs, but it's also addressing the abandonment issue, and this is going up to Congress, to remind you. So our policymakers are going to be addressing and making supports on what do we do when trials are over with and how do we support participants. And this is my fair warning to the investigator community and to the industry that if we don't self-govern ourselves, policymakers on the Hill are going to make decisions for us. So I would say we need to collectively come up with solutions for this so that we don't have people who have no idea and who are not connected to this industry making decisions for us. And finally, on the global scale, both OECD and UNESCO put out guidelines last year in neurotechnology, specifically addressing what do we do in post-trials and how do we abandon it. So there's a lot of avenues for you to get involved in this and help to shape our future forward. So I encourage you to get involved in whatever way that might be. This is an example of what to do afterwards that is actually taken from the gene therapy community of how do we address and take fantastic technology, but we're addressing very small markets. And what they're doing in the gene side of things is they're addressing it through what's called a public benefit corporation. So that is an avenue that we should look for. Public benefit corporations cannot be in every state in the US, but they can have their groundwork and operate outside of those states, but they need to be incorporated in specific states. It's something definitely to look into as a potential solution going forward. So in this discussion, I want to leave you with a couple of things to think about as we get into the discussion. If you haven't read this book, has anybody read this book? Think again. Adam Grant. Oh, I got at least one person in it. Anybody else? All right. Well, it's a great book. There's a lot of recommendations at the end, but I want to leave you with a couple of them. One is that we really have to think about and seek out people that don't agree with us. And that's really important in shaping views as we go forward. We also have to think about task conflict and really progressive listening, because there are a lot of viewpoints when it comes to this issue. And I want to leave you with the last point, which is from, does anybody know the Dunning and Kruger effect? Do I have any psychologists in here? Oh, I do. Well, the way that Adam Grant calls it is please don't sit on top of the Mount Stupid. And Mount Stupid means that, that means I know everything. I've been in this industry forever. I know how to address this. And the reality of it is that we don't. And until, it doesn't matter where you are in your career, you've got to remember that there's still a lot of learning to do and really a lot of ways of looking at different perspectives. So I ask you as we address this issue is please don't sit on the mountain of Mount Stupid. Let's be able to collectively come up with a solution. And I also want to leave you with this, which is always one of the most important messages that we can take home, is that those with lived experience are the experts in the room, and please don't forget to listen to them. Thank you so much, and enjoy the rest of the panel.
Okay, I'm going to try to be efficient here. So what I would like to do is present a proposed solution. This does not solve all the problems of abandoned technology, but I think it is a piece that can help with at least some of the issues. So the thing that I see that makes this problem so difficult is that it can't be solved by money alone. And I'm not going to talk about all of these things, but I'm going to skip to the last thing, which is the regulatory permission. So even the most noble-minded person who wants to help someone with abandoned technology is still going to have to live by the FDA's rules if they're in the US or whatever regulatory body. And as far as I know, the FDA can't be bought. You have to reach their requirements. And so that someone has to do that. It's not just money. And so that's part of the problem, and what I hope to propose here is one way of approaching that, at least with some devices, some systems. So I'm going to be introducing this public charity, giveahand.tech. It sort of exists. It exists in my mind. Does that count? Anyway, hopefully by the end of the year it'll be a IRS identified 501c3, but that remains to be seen. The mission is to serve as an adoptive home for people with abandoned implantable devices. So I'm thinking specifically of implantable devices like we have been talking about today. So not other technologies. There's certainly other technologies that get abandoned. But I'm talking about those that are class 3 medical devices that therefore have this big issue of the regulatory hurdles. And the goal is enable people to keep using the implant that's inside of them for the function that they gained. I mean, it's a pretty simple goal, and try to do that for the rest of their lifetime. That's the goal. So here's how we're gonna do this. So now I have to take a brief aside, which is I've talked this over with a lot of different people. I never get to presenting the solution because there are so many major issues that everyone identifies as you start to talk about it that we end up talking about those. So I've identified 8, and I'm going to call these givens, which means what I want you to do is imagine a world where the following 8 things are already in place. What could you do with, as far as supporting abandoned technology, if you could solve these 8? All right, so you'll have to suspend this, and for the discussion section, obviously, when we have the discussion, we can talk about whether some or all of these 8 are ridiculous. They might be. But anyway, I get to dream, and I'm talking, so here it goes. The first 2 are easy, straightforward. Any charity or foundation is going to have these, some way to get money, financially solvent, right? That's not easy, but it can be done. Lots of people have done it. And obtaining the right liability coverage so they don't get sued out to oblivion, all of that kind of stuff. So those things have to be in place. Those 2, I think, are pretty, every foundation would need that. Now we get into the difficult things. First, that researchers would research, when I say researchers, I mean academic researchers, I mean people starting, startup companies, whoever's doing a clinical study or even a commercial product, that they would be willing to enter into a contract with giveahand.tech prior to the first human implantation. So what the solution I'm proposing takes place before the first implant takes place. So you have to get FDA IDE approval, you have to get IRB approval, you have to get a contract with giveahand.tech. So that's part of the issue. I think people will probably have to be forced to do this, frankly, but that's something for discussion later. For the FDA will accept or allow, or whatever you want to call it, something called a long-term support IDE that can be renewed perpetually. And the idea here is that you're tracking adverse events, but it allows you, the FDA then gives you that allowance to do repairs and keep these systems going, and that they accept whatever the protocols are, and they won't step in and stop you from doing that long-term support. Number 5, that the cosmic system, so the cosmic system, the Cleveland Modular Implant, Network Neuroprosthesis, open source system. If you want more details, go to cosmic.org, that's with 2 I's. But that system itself will be available forever. Okay, forever, maybe should be in quotes, but whatever, 50 years. All right, we're gonna say 50 years is the same as forever. And number 6, that the cosmic system can mimic the function of all other implantable devices. Again, all in quotes. So to the extent that this system cannot mimic another device, then the solution I'm proposing doesn't apply. So I'll give you a very quick example. I wish I could solve the second site retinal implant issue. I don't think that this fits within this, all right? At least not yet, although there are other options. Oh, I'm beeping. Am I late already? I don't know how to shut this off, but anyway. Let's see. There will always be at least one surgeon and always one technically knowledgeable person who's willing to help support and the person with abandoned technology. And we'll talk about that in a minute, but the purpose of Give a Hand, one of the purposes of giveahand.tech is to provide those individuals, so the surgeon, the well-minded people, with all the background resources that they need to actually be able to just help someone without having to worry about, is the FDA going to show up at my door and claim I'm a device manufacturer now and put me in jail or sue me out of my house or whatever, right? So that's what the foundation provides for the well-meaning people who want to help. Okay, it's easy now. You believe those 8 things, they're in place. The general approach is, as I mentioned, you got to plan ahead. So this happens before the first implant. The foundation will support researchers to do their own long-term follow-up. That's the best, because they're very knowledgeable, they want to support, they want to do that. If you can do it at home, that's a lot better. And I think Ron and I and Graham and others who have been doing this for a long time, there's just a few things, a few pieces that if someone else could step in and take care of those things, it would be a whole lot easier to maintain support long term. And then third, provide an adoptive home when number 1 and 2 fail. So that's the idea. So here's the basic strategy. I mentioned the upfront contract, and there's a lot of pieces to this that we can talk about the details, but the main thing is that the researcher is certifying, provides a provision in their IDE of long-term technology availability. And again, let's just say 50 years. So that this technology is going to be available 50 years. There's 2 ways to do that, and those are on the next 2 slides, okay? So those are coming. In exchange, giveahand.tech agrees to provide support for the users if the technology becomes abandoned. And if it becomes abandoned, the big thing is that giveahand.tech assumes sponsorship of the IDE. And that is then converted into this long-term support IDE, which is number, 4 on my givens, right? So that exists, and it gets transferred into that so that giveahand.tech can now legally and under regulatory approval do the long-term follow-up, which includes external repairs, internal repairs, whatever it might be. Giveahand.tech also generally takes ownership of any remaining inventory, and I have some ideas about that. And giveahand.tech leans heavily on the surgical and technical expertise that's out there, right? That's not absolutely necessary, but they're generally surgeons, they're generally technicians, they're generally people who want to support the abandoned technology. They just need the infrastructure to be able to do it. Giveahand.tech relies on there being something like that. Okay, so now I said there were 2 options for providing long-term technology availability. There's option A and there's option Z, and we'll talk about those, and then the ones in between. So option A is to bank the technology. And I think that this is probably the one that people would say first. That's fine. All the person has to do is put on the shelf enough devices to support the population if they become abandoned for the rest of their lives. The problem, there's a lot of problems with that, but one of the problems is most things they have a limited shelf life. So sterilization alone typically limits it to a few years. If there's batteries in it, those have a shelf life, etc. So they would have to demonstrate, I can sit this stuff on a shelf somewhere for 50 years and you can pull it off 49 years later and use it. And that has to be part of your IDE, so the FDA has to agree to that. And then they have to donate a supply of devices based on each person who's enrolled in the trial, which is fine with one person. You figure out, okay, technology lasts 5 years, they're going to live 50 years, I need 9 more devices sitting in the inventory ready just in case. it gets pretty expensive pretty quickly. I think option A, although it's, I think the option most people would say, oh yeah, this is what I'll do, pretty quickly you say, this is not going to work. This can't work. So there's option Z, which is having a backup technology. And this, you'll have to bend your brain around this because it's not something you would normally think of. And at first, when you hear it, you're going to say, this makes no sense. Who would ever do this? But please think about it a little longer because it's not actually that crazy. So the IDE must include validation that the cosmic system, now remember, I think it's number 5 or 6 on my list, the cosmic system is going to be available forever. So you don't have to worry about the 50-year shelf life, that's already taken care of by using the cosmic system. And number 7 or 6, it can mimic every system out there. All right, that was every in quotes, but anyway, you have to validate. Now the researcher has to do this, right? Validate that it's an alternative for providing the same functionality. So it's not the same system, but usually we're talking about electrical stimulation, we're talking about sensors. There's some very specific things that the system has to do. Stimulation parameters, for example. And the point is to say the cosmic system mimics those, can do those. This is made easy by easier by the fact that the cosmic system is open source. There's an open source master file that you can refer to in your FDA documents and stuff like that. We can talk about those details if you want to. But that is their way of certifying that there's going to be a backup technology long-term for the individuals who are in the study. So that is really, that's option Z. So B to Y is any shade in between. So I think a pretty reasonable alternative is that there's a certain amount of banked technology that would take you, say, maybe 5 years afterwards, but then you need to pick it up with the backup technology, with the cosmic system. So there can be shades of what that is. All right, so that's it. I'm going to stop here. This is the basic strategy to try to provide long-term support. So there'll be plenty to talk about, and I think now, I'm skipping this, I think Graham is next, who is virtual somewhere.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I trust you can hear me. And I'm coming at this remotely, thanks to the audiovisual team. I wish I could be there with you in person and to meet all the many old friends who are together today. I'm coming at this at a slightly different angle, from a different complementary device, to see if there's anything we can illuminate or learn from other systems. And the system that I've been involved with for, let me just escape that. The system that I've been involved with for 40 years now is really this system. If I can get the slides to work. That's better. The system developed by Brindley, marketed by Finetech and manufactured by them, and then called Vocare in the United States for restoring bladder bowel and indeed some sexual function. So this was, to put it in context, I look on the cardiac pacemaker as the sort of prototype of these devices. Single channel device, huge market, and really available in some form for at least 6 decades. By contrast, the phrenic pacemaker, tiny market, but nevertheless been available essentially in a similar form for 50 years, just 2 channels, and perhaps survived because it's life-sustaining and it allows people to get off a ventilator, to be able to speak more naturally. And so it has been of sufficient value, even though it's just a very small market. The Vocare bladder and bowel system, relatively simple, 2 or 3 channels, and then in context with the freehand system, which, as you've heard, was put in Jim Jadich in 1986 and began to be commercially available in 1998. So the bladder and bowel system was developed by the Medical Research Council in the UK and first put in humans at this time. And then it became commercially available first in the UK in 1983 and then spread to Europe and Australasia. In 1993, we started trials of it in Cleveland as the easiest way to get it into the States, thanks to Hunter Peckham, who suggested to me that this might be brought to the States, and was very encouraging and supportive throughout, especially with helping to get it through regulatory approval and through his founding of Neurocontrol Corporation, which sponsored a multi-center clinical trial starting in 1996 that resulted in FDA approval of this device as a humanitarian use device in 1998. And then Neurocontrol distributed it in the US and in other countries from 1998 till 2002. Unfortunately, as you know, they stopped doing this in 2002, so distribution reverted back to Fintech in the UK, and they continued to manufacture it for the next 20 years, but there wasn't a US distributor. And so essentially, I think it met the definition of an abandoned implantable device in this country. So what have we tried to do about this, particularly for those patients who received it in the United States? My role as an MD has been mainly troubleshooting and trying to maintain the device for existing patients. Fortunately, as with the other implants we've heard about, the implanted components are very reliable. Mean time to failure is about 20 years. The external parts fail more often, but can be repaired or replaced more easily. So solving simple problems, there are no batteries in the body. I can describe to patients by telephone how to replace the batteries in the external controller using batteries that they can buy in a hardware store. If leads break, which is the commonest fault in the external equipment, I can mail them a lead left over from inventory that was left behind by Neurocontrol. I've also acted as a go-between between patients and the manufacturer in Britain. Sometimes they need to replace an external controller, and some patients have been able to purchase these out of pocket on a per patient basis from the manufacturer. And we've occasionally had to buy new implants to replace implants in patients in this country. Rarely, but I've arranged these occasional repair surgeries in this country, and on one occasion arranged a replacement surgery where the patient had to go to Europe for a replacement after a surgeon in this country mistakenly cut the leads and removed the implant. So what, if anything, can we learn from the experience of this device as the components of this complex solutions to abandonment? I start with people. People make things happen, and as we've heard, we need both the clinical and technical people with the knowledge and skills to be able to maintain and, if need be, repair and replace devices. But a lot of people today have been in the first generation of neuroprostheses. I'm 76, Hunter's 80, Giles Brindley is 98. And as active as we may be, we're not going to be here forever. So we have to be mentoring new generations. And Hunter has been a mentor par excellence, as many of you know, and as I know from personal experience. Then there's the technology, which we've talked about a lot, and we'll talk about more. Should it be simple? Well, what do we mean by that? It should be simple to use, otherwise patients won't use it. It should ideally be simple to implant. Otherwise, it's difficult to get surgeons to implant it. Does it have to be simple to manufacture? Well, we have the example of cell phones, which are certainly not simple to manufacture, but billions of people pay for them out of pocket because of the value they provide. So it depends how complex and expensive it is to make them. Ideally, we want to keep them cheap, and that impacts the complexity. But is it really cheapness that's the goal? The real goal, I think, is cost effectiveness. In other words, as is often described in healthcare, we need to look at the value, defined as the benefit over the costs. And it's tempting to keep on adding benefits. We all want more benefit, more function. That may add value, provided it doesn't raise the costs disproportionately. It may decrease the value if the costs go up disproportionately. So we have to look at this ratio of benefit to cost to keep it cost effective. And the costs are not just financial, there are all the intangible, non-financial costs as well. But it has to be cost effective, however you measure that, if it's going to be paid for by health insurance, by Medicare, by national healthcare systems in other countries. And so if we are going forward to be able not only just to manage abandoned devices, but also prevent abandonment, then industry has to be able to have devices that are cost effective so that they can sell them and stay in business, obviously. And only if they can be commercially viable can these devices be clinically available, not just to provide more benefit for individuals, but to provide benefit for more individuals. So thank you for your attention, and I'll stop there.
All right, thank you, Graham. Now we'll hear from Peter Gorman.
Let's see. The down button.
We still have Graham's.
Going the wrong way.
Okay.
Oh. There we go. Thanks for this great opportunity to acknowledge the mentorship of Hunter over these years. All of you know that he's an amazing individual who deserves such recognition as a day like this. My role as a spinal cord clinician is just to give you a clinical perspective of a person just taking care of patients 5 or 6 days a week, maybe 7 days a week sometimes, in the context of this abandonment phenomenon. And just to embarrass myself a little bit, this is me in the Applied Neural Control Lab. Tom, I don't know if you recognize this. That's a PDP-11 there in the corner there, if you remember that technology that we use to run our Fortran programs to collect data. So it's been a while. I want to also, oops, wrong way. I have a picture of Jeanette. Her maiden name was Jeanette Simone, and she was working with us in Baltimore when she got her implant back in around 1996, working on the freehand system and its first implementation in the technology transfer process. I think that was a Intel 386 processor running Windows 95, something like that. So, and I'm really impressed that indeed that technology is still working in Jeanette, and that is just wonderful to hear. I really have two slides only to share with you, and then to sort of be as a cue for discussion. So I think that some of the key clinical issues in neuroprosthetic research and ongoing care that are mentioned about by others, but I'll emphasize in a clinical context, are first the idea of informed consent and the idea of enrollee expectations. So when any individual signs a consent form approved by an IRB, really that's sort of a basic. Everybody in this room knows about what IRBs are, but it's not always well determined how one writes that IRB to deal with the question that we're really trying to address today, this idea of ongoing consent. And indeed, when I've been sitting on IRBs, that's becoming more of a buzzword. How do you inform a patient, especially if they are involved in a year-long, 2-year-long study, that they have the opportunity to withdraw in 2 years or not withdraw or make changes in their determination as to whether they are providing consent to the investigators. We talk about abandonment, but one other part of this is if we tell our patients, well, we are not going to be able to support you after the research is over, and we say that in written form in the consent, at least we've informed. And so that is important at least to do. And to have a nebulousness to the consent form is problematic in my opinion. But the other major clinical concern that I want to bring up, and this has been talked about already, but I'll just talk about how do you maintain long-term care in these patients who have signed consent forms and continue in a research protocol, or indeed, if they've had a system in place after FDA approval, like the neurocontrol devices that were formerly called freehand, how do you provide them? And I did have the opportunity to talk to one of the other patients who was involved in the freehand implant in Baltimore, Kevin Hara, a few days ago, and he's actually was very successful. He became a lawyer, lives in California, went through law school with a freehand system, was implanted in '96, and then unfortunately, though, in 2006, one of the surface electrode on the thenar eminence extruded and it had to be explanted in California. And I asked him, why did you not reach out to either myself or to the Cleveland group as to try to get this replaced? And as other people have already said, life happens. And for him, life happens in a positive way. He was a practicing lawyer doing actually work in the medical device field as a defense lawyer for major manufacturers, kind of ironically or maybe on purpose. And he also got married and had lived a life. And the time commitment that he talked about, the fact that proximity to a center to do this work was not there in California, even though I think he did go to Stanford at one point. I don't know if he saw Rod Hentz or somebody like that, but he did get a consultation to see if that electrode could be re-implanted, but decided against it given the downtime it would take in terms of his life and the time it would take, the commitment it would take to participate in maintenance of the program. So we've talked about this before. Mike Keith is going to retire. Hunter's retiring. Maybe I will retire someday too. I'm not a surgeon, but I'm a person that supports this as a neurologist. And so how do you train the next generation? That's clearly a focus of what we're talking about today. Next generation of engineers, next generation of spinal cord injury physicians, next generation of surgeons, next generation of occupational therapists. And where is the location? So if you only do this in Cleveland, well, how does that serve a person even in, some place in Cincinnati, even if you're in the same state? It's not easy. Locational care delivery, especially for a person who uses a wheelchair for mobility, is not trivial, as many of our folks in the room can attest. And how do you keep an active communication with those people who are in the trenches taking care of these patients day to day? So if you have an implantable system in a person who lives in Iowa, how do you inform that spinal cord physician or the local orthopedic or hand surgeon about what to look for and how to treat these potential complications for these patients? And that's another sort of 30,000-foot final slide is that of the spectrum of implanted technology, and I want to sort of fit the freehand and upper extremity devices into this spectrum. So I always consider those biomedical engineered implants that are established and are used in a large population, those that are established but are in small populations, and those that are simply research only. And I'll just list a few on each of the three categories. You can imagine that things like the baclofen pumps that are used in a lot of individuals with spasticity secondary to spinal cord injury or other upper motor neuron conditions are really ubiquitous in the United States, at least. And pacemakers, as we've talked about before, and epidural stimulators that are used by pain clinicians. Those are established programs run by companies like Medtronic or Boston Scientific. The clinician, from a clinician's perspective, if I have a problem with one of my baclofen pump patients, I have a 1-800 number that I can call 24/7 to troubleshoot online with somebody if I can't handle the problem. And I have a reasonable number of surgeons in Baltimore that I can refer to replace the pump or the catheter associated with the pump. But I was talking to one of the surgeons that I rely on in this endeavor and learned that neurosurgeons in their training are only required to do 10 implants to be certified, to become a certified neurosurgeon. And those 10 implants do not necessarily mean they are just baclofen pumps, but also epidural stimulators. So it is conceivable that a neurosurgeon, fully trained, will never put in a baclofen pump, even in academic medical centers. So even in these highly sophisticated, profitable bioengineered devices, such as the baclofen pump, there are still gaps. So what we've talked about, though, are in the freehand and Vocare, and Graham has just talked to us a little bit about how he supported the freehand and Vocare. Tony Ignani, are you here somewhere? I think Tony's somewhere up there. There he is. Okay. So the diaphragm pacing system that Synapse Biomedical puts in is also an established system, but with a small population. And I specifically formatted the slide to indicate that the NeuroRx deep diaphragm pacing system is a little bit closer to the left than the freehand and Vocare, suggesting that credit to you, Tony. You have successfully, or whoever else is with you. Oh, there's Ray. Okay, so to both of you, you have created a small volume, clinically successful, commercially viable system, and your company still survives. So, trying to compare freehand and Vocare, which maybe is a little smaller volume, and how the differences between the two, is important to understand. If we want to try eventually to say move some of these into, even though that's not a large population, into a clinically viable, long-term supported, commercially supported system, such as the baclofen pumps or pacemakers. And then, of course, there's these ideas of the deep brain, not deep brain rather, but BMI, which is now very popular, especially since Elon Musk got into the business, among others. But these are systems that Hunter is familiar with through the collaboration through Brown. In Baltimore, there is a DBS brain-machine interface program being developed there. I think the point is that, at least in our lifetimes, I think that it is not likely that those systems will become commercially viable. So back to this other point I made about informed consent. In those informed consents for those patients, it really is important or imperative that those volunteers understand the limitations of what we can or can't do, unless Elon Musk is going to throw $1 billion at them. So with that, I have one last slide. This is a photo I found in some old Kodak paper in my basement a few days ago. I can't figure out where the heck we are. Hunter, do you know where we are? And who, or Jeff? I assume it may be Vegas, but I'm not 100% sure. But and who, I'm not sure all the individuals, but you weren't paying for it, so it must have been Jeff. So anyway, if you know the answer, tell me later. Thank you very much.
So Kip has some remarks, and then what time we have left, we'll try to, come on up, Kip, if you'd like, or stay seated. It's up to you. You don't have any slides, so.
So first of all, I'd like to thank Kevin for an enormous amount of work and thought for a very difficult problem. I'm usually the first person in the room to get into the technical details all quickly and stuff like that. And if you looked at it as assume this ahead of time, probably 4 or 5 of them are because of me. And so because of that, something can get lost, which is, I think this has a way to help people. I think it's there. I think there might be cases where this could be done and cases where it can't. And that's still really important to acknowledge. I think the reason I'm here is not actually because of anything I'm doing now, but because after Joe Pancrazio, I inherited leadership of the Advanced Neuroprosthetics program, and a lot of people in this room suddenly went from contracts to try to help people, to open review, to try to help people when they've already implanted subjects who are getting a benefit. And so I wanted to kind of just acknowledge, even now the NIH is trying to get better about this, but there's not an infinite amount of money. They are trying for any new application that's coming in to say, what's your plan post this study? Historically, and I can't remember which one of you said this, whether it was Hunter, whether it was Bob, whether it was Ron, whether it was Kevin Kilgore, but when they went to open peer review, and none of the scientists in peer review had ever translated anything in their life to humans. And so they had to educate them. And they would talk a little bit about, because NIH had an innovation score and things like that, if I wanted to continue helping someone that I'm helping, they'd say, okay, what's the spoonful of sugar to help the medicine go down here? And I don't think they want to talk about this because they know the risk that I'm about to talk about wasn't nearly as much as the subjects who took the risk to help other people as well. But they took a lot of personal risk there because that made it a lot harder to get grants to further careers and lab as well. Now, I have been part of NIH review since then, and they say, what's your long-term plan? And I think John Shea was there for one of the ones I was in. And I remember talking to people afterwards, and you don't talk about specifics of review afterwards, but I remember thinking, did anybody hear a good answer? Typically what they were talking about is remove it, leave it in but don't maintain it, or do what I came from industry that's called cut and cap. Because a lot of times, because of its delicate neural tissue and it gets healed in, you don't want to mess with that. So you go as close as you can, and then you kind of cut it and you cap it. And the reason they do this, and this is something that's maybe I just want people to know as we maybe discuss this, is when you're dealing with these large market things, you're dealing with supply chains. And the interior of the lumens and things like that, actually there's been 50 recalls of spinal cord stimulators in the last 20 years. In the last 5 years, there's been 10 recalls of vagus nerve stimulators. And they tend to have things to do with the leads associated with them, and often something to do with the supply chain, where fluid gets behind the electrode and something that was typically cleaned off wasn't perfectly cleaned off by the supplier anymore, and then that gets out. And honestly, I'm, as part of my consulting, asked a lot to debug those things. So I just wanted to mention that that's kind of an important consideration when you have small numbers of subjects. Those become less problematic. But because I come from industry, one of the first meetings I was in was, and this was for a large market device, a subject who had been implanted was driving a car and got in a car accident. And the IPG was in the chest, and the steering wheel hit the IPG. And no one in the room knew what to do because it had been dented at 30 degrees. You do your electrical checks and everything was fine. And everybody went, what do we do? We didn't even game plan for this. Do we go in? Do we take it out? What are the risks? And so you have a lot of people on the spot doing a risk analysis, and what do? Do you do another surgery? Do you leave it in? Do you wait till you have a problem? So when you scale up, you see a lot of things you wouldn't expect. And that's actually why I was impressed when Ron said cars and things like that as well. So I just kind of want to mention that as something as part of this discussion as well. But most importantly, Kevin, I really appreciate all the thought you're putting into this.
Thanks, Kip. In the 15 or so minutes we have left, I'm sure Kevin would appreciate any kind of feedback, criticism, constructive or not. And maybe I'll start off, and we'll start with the panel. But Kevin, Peter mentioned a couple of things that didn't appear in your evil 8, I guess, right? You know, team members. So how is GiveAHand.tech going to maintain a continuity of expertise? Location, we're assuming that it'll have a countrywide catchment, right? And we've still got the medical care community, capitalized medicine, without a single payer to deal with. So I want to know if you could comment on that, and we'll kick it off there, and then I'll leave it to Jen, Peter, and Kip to offer suggestions or other issues.
All right, so this means I have to remember these issues, so I wrote them down. But location is maybe the easiest one. That was on a slide that I skipped. But the support is going to have to be at centralized sites. So the people will have to travel, at least when it comes to implanted replacement. I don't see a way around that. If someone else has another alternative, that's great. A bus, with an operating room in it, that would be fine. But I don't see that happening. So people will have to travel. Now the external components, that stuff can be done, most of the time can be done long distance and virtually, and that probably is pretty straightforward. Long-term team members. So team members, someone with expertise is a challenge. But a lot of the hardest thing, I think, to think about trying to support are complex systems that have a complex electrode that is very tricky to replace. And so here's my solution. I'm not going to do that. So I'm sorry. That's why I can't do second sight, right? That's a retinal implant. That's a unique electrode, complicated to do surgically. But there's a lot of things like unique DBS systems, spinal cord vagal nerve stimulators, as well as our neuroprostheses, that the electrodes are not that complicated. And most of the time, what I'm thinking about replacing are the power supplies. The batteries will definitely fail. They will have to be replaced, and that's a pretty simple replacement. So what's the expertise required to do that? It doesn't take much. I mean, obviously, there's some expertise there, but that is not a unique skill set. So I think that can be maintained long term. So as you dig down, there's going to be limits. And in the end, maybe you say, well, you're only supporting 10% of the abandoned users out there. And I would say, well, if I can only do 10%, should I stop or should I keep going? And I think that by setting it up and getting an infrastructure to start with, then you can start imagining how can I support and expand this to more complex systems. And the third thing was payers, which is money. So I think that, that really is going to come down to individual monetary support for the surgery, the device, who's going to get the device, that kind of stuff. That is individual fundraising. Right now, that's my solution. Each person is going to have to, work that out. Now, ideally, I think it was number 1 on my list, if this public charity is fully funded and supported, then it's able to support those kinds of things. But certainly initially, that's a lot to take on. It's hard to imagine how you would do that. So
Yeah.
on a case-by-case, individual basis, that's what you end up doing.
I was, payment is certainly an issue, but I was thinking about communications with the rank and file medical professionals. I mean, suppose in Peter's practice, he refers someone to a new device, and then they move and someone a long way away, it's getting their care somewhere else. How do we interact with the clinical community to make sure they know? Or I've asked Peter this question, preparing for this, as a clinician, is this part of your decision-making process? Do you refer patients only to groups that are able to take care of long-term, or do you say, sorry, crazy Dr. X, I'm not going to respond by referring any of my patients to you until you do this? So I don't know whether that's to Kevin or to Peter, or Graham, but you can all chip in.
I'm looking for solutions because I think that's what we want to do. So some of the simple things is that if a person with a baclofen and pump, for instance, will have a wallet card that has 800 numbers on it and so forth, and a person who has autonomic dysreflexia has a card, who is prone to AD will have a card about that. So patients or individuals who have implanted neuroprosthetic hand graft systems should have a card, maybe simply to allow them to contact either the Cleveland Center or some other centralized center that will be the key. And I don't know if it'll be 24/7, but it could be 5 days a week, some type of clearinghouse. So part of your Help a Hand organization should be at least somebody to answer questions through an 800 number. I think that.
I guess as we rally around, or if we rally around this Give a Hand Tech organization, it would be pretty important, I would think, to have an educated clinical delivery system that would then say, sorry guys, in addition to the funding agents, have it from the ground up saying, you're not going to get referrals from me until this is in place. But the other thing I wanted to ask Kevin is, in terms of personnel, I was impressed that you didn't talk about the role of volunteers in this organization, right? People giving hands are not necessarily paid employees of Give a Hand, right?
Yeah, I took that out.
Oh, sorry.
I took that out, yeah.
Can I volunteer right now?
Yes, you can. I'll sign you up. Good. Kip is on board.
Can you solder?
So I think
Is that a legal contract?
Yeah. So
It's witness.
yeah, really. Look at all these witnesses. So I think that one of the things that at least I've found is that there are a lot of people who are willing to help. And the problem is that, like, legally, if they really think about it, for example, one of the abandoned device articles talks about, I think it was one of the migraine stimulator devices that failed. Well, as you read the article, you realize what failed is the battery in the external controller, and now his migraines are back because he can't use his device and the company's out of business or whatever. I forget which company that is. Anyway, the point is, any engineer worth their salt can open up a device and replace the stupid battery, right? That's not difficult to do. The problem is, technically, if you do that, you've just become a manufacturer of a medical device. And so what I would like the foundation to be able to do is to provide that buffer, if you will, so that volunteers can be free to be volunteers and provide that technical support without thinking that they're going to be in trouble. That's what I'm hoping. So when you volunteer, I'll protect you. How about that?
So can I make a comment on that?
Yes, please.
So I do want to quote Hunter that we won't make change by doing the same old thing. If you guys saw these on the table. The one thing I learned in running foundations is we can't rely on volunteers. Volunteers have good hearts, and we love them. And believe me, I've run a lot of organizations where we have volunteers, but the reliability comes when we have employees. And that's the reality of running a foundation. And I've run into this quite a bit. I mean, for warrior sailing, we would hire our captains because they were much more reliable. And hiring somebody on a sailboat compared to hiring somebody to replace a medical device are two different things. But you have to think about the financial sustainability of things. And foundations and getting a lot of that financial sustainability is extremely difficult. I don't want to throw a bucket of ice all over you, but it is. And I think that's where the benefit, when we start to look at public benefit corporations, I'm a capitalist. So you can have the for-profit side and have a nonprofit side all in one organization and be able to funnel money over to the nonprofit side to be able to do those types of supports. But you have an engine, which is how our economy works, is building some type of profitability into it. Because that financial sustainability, you might have a lot of support up front, but then maintaining that over a period of time becomes much more difficult. And you'll start to see a drop off over a period of time, unless you have a sugar daddy. If you have a sugar daddy or a sugar mama, they can support you, but that would be a big estate that you would have to find.
Everybody buy lottery tickets next time Mega Millions is over $1 billion.
All right, so Kip, can I hire you instead of volunteering?
You don't have to pay them a lot.
I do think there's an important point here that, and honestly, something has struck me as part of this conversation that I didn't know. So I tend to follow the big markets and new stuff that comes out, and I go right to the FDA when something's gone through, and I look at what are the adverse events and how do they did. And one of the things that just shocked me about this conversation is your lead failure rate is much lower than a lot of the established industry and the stuff that's coming out. And I always think it gets down to keep it simple, stupid. Some of the DBS leads are 40 channel and things like that. Is now they have more suppliers and a more complicated supply chain. And so I think some of the thing about making something maintainable and sustainability is maybe getting some of this out there that if you make it simple, it's more likely to last longer, at least the parts of it that I can't do anything about. Yes. And maybe we should put a lot more emphasis on engineering those well.
Can I comment on that?
Please.
So one of the things you helped me to see, Kip, actually, in the conversations we just had recently is, you can't, this give-a-hand.tech or any approach here can't solve bad design. And so that's kind of a critical issue, right? And so as I'm kind of looking at certain devices that are out there and trying to figure out, well, how would the cosmic system mimic those, for example? And I look at some of them and I say, I don't think there's a way, if this device got infected, it doesn't appear to me that there's a way to get it out without like seriously damaging the nerve that it's on or something like that. And those kinds of things, I think, this foundation cannot solve. Because to me, that's a fundamentally bad, like you shouldn't be sticking that in there, in my opinion. Of course, maybe there's, it's life-saving, I don't know. But still, there should be a way in which it can be replaced because some of them are going to get infected. Some of them are going to fail. Absolutely. Some of them have to be replaced. So if there isn't a pathway to do that on the surgical and technology side, there's nothing that, at least in the way I envision this, there's no solution from give-a-hand.tech for that kind of thing.
Anyone else on the panel have suggestions for Graham, please?
Well, just to follow up on what Kip just said, I think I strongly support this idea of keeping it simple, and that's not only keeping technology as simple as possible, only as complex enough as is necessary to get the function you want, but also keep the surgery simple if we can. There is a movement, of course, to less invasive surgery, but in both the technology and the clinical surgery, simplicity, if we can, will not only make it easier to spread the technology, but also to fix it and to maintain it if it does get abandoned.
All right. I think we have about 5 minutes left. Please.
Well, can I just make one more comment on because I am a dollar and cents girl. I know we always say that the people that are the participants get to go out and raise the money, but I tell you, living with a disability is expensive, right? We have to pay for catheters, we have to pay for home care. A lot comes out of our pockets. And yes, some of us have careers and we're able to make an income, but a lot of that income gets spent on the expense of living with a disability. And I don't think that when we think about how this is going to be financially stable, of putting the onus on the person with the implanted device. So there needs to be, if we expect that I'm going to raise money for a specific individual to replace them, don't put the onus on that. All of the onus There should be some ownership there. But don't put all the onus on the person living with the condition, because they're dealing with a lot of other issues that come along with it. So,
One quick, so piggyback, how else will we fund this? Well, one thing that sort of comes to mind pretty clearly, that this is an opportunity for further research, indeed. So you're looking at long-term consequences of implanted neuroprosthesis. Where is the NIH involved in this? Can you create a grant in your foundation to support ongoing 5-year, 10-year work? Will that be viable as a proposal to federal funding to help you, at least give you a foundation of support?
Yes.
There's another very important point here. And honestly, it's something I ask anybody, especially the research scientists, to do, but everybody, in honor of Hunter. The NIH has a finite budget, and NNDS covers, I think, 768 diseases and disorders. And there's this myth, though, like, why isn't NIH giving more funding for this? Your program directors don't decide their budget. Congress decides their budget. And we, as research scientists, we like to do the research, and there's something like NIH is going to advocate for us. They can't legally approach Congress and say, give us more money for this. You have to do it. And so part of our job is not just to try to do the research, it's to be part of that process. And honestly, I've seen Hunter on the Hill a number of times trying to get things to change there. And we all need to take that responsibility going forward.
So to look it up, the American Brain Coalition, look it up, americanbraincoalition.org, with all the recent budget cuts to the Brain Initiative, has a Friends of the Brain Initiative, as well as we're working on Friends of NINDS going to the Hill collectively, because yes, federal agencies can't advocate for it, but you can. And you can join the coalition for all the work that we're doing on the Hill to bring back that funding.
All right, I'm going to encourage people from the audience to catch Kevin, corner him in the hallway during the break, because I'm going to take the second of our last 5 minutes. Because it speaks, I have a couple closing slides that just speak to what we've just been talking about, if this still works. Bye, Graham.
So here.
Oh, I had a set of closing, my closing slides didn't show up. Lucky for you all because, well, unfortunately for you all because they're spectacular. Okay, thank you. Only because there's an embarrassing photo of Hunter in it. That's the only reason I want to do this. It was called Trio Closing. Any questions from the audience while we're waiting? So Joe, Hunter's not the only one, or who said it? Kevin. Hunter's not the only one who's always late, so. Oh, thanks. And there we go. I wanted to end by introducing you all to Dale Moore. Dale's a Army veteran, a recipient of one of our first 6, I think, IRS-8 standing systems, and the first to have a spiral nerve cuff electrode implanted on his femoral nerves. He passed away in 2021 from COVID, and I only bring this up because I don't think he ever needed an implanted component replaced. We upgraded his 8 to a 16 and put nerve cuffs in, but all the implanted stuff worked. But we established a Dale Moore Neurotechnology Research and Education Fund initially to help with co-pays for people who want to get new systems. And I told Kevin, this fund is available for long-term support of people too when there are things that need to be paid for with no other way. So Jen, take your advice very seriously. There's a QR code if anyone's feeling generous. And the link, and if you don't go to the QR code, just go to the MCRR website, and what pops up there is the former co-director. I don't know, are you retired from Metro 2 yet, Hunter? Or is that the end of the day? All right, so Rich and John better update this page soon. And it's the bottom radio box on the Donate Now list. So that's how we're honoring Dale and how at least we're trying to get started in, maybe this is the equivalent of $15,000 a head to start NCC. I don't know. And it's a memorial for Dale. And finally, the guy in the bow tie is Hunter, and I think you should all know, first of all, it came up briefly that Hunter is obviously a sailor, which we all knew, but people may not know that he doesn't know how to tie a bow tie, or he's physically incapable of tying a bow tie. And I have often said that the reason he recruited me to come to Cleveland is because he knew I was gullible enough to buy his old boat, and that I would tie a bow tie whenever he needed it for a tuxedo. So, Hunter, I want to thank you personally for that, and we'll take a break, and I'm only 4 minutes over my extra 5. Coming back in 10 minutes.
to last. Okay. So our next session is entitled Commercialization. What will make neuroprosthetic systems for spinal cord injury sustainably available? I think it's a great follow-on discussion, especially after the enlightening discussion around abandonment, but also our lunchtime discussion, where oftentimes you think you're in the field and you know history and you learn new things, and I think it was a great dialogue from the panelists. So, and joining us as a kind of a follow-on from lunch discussion will be Megan Moynihan, our Executive Director for the Institute for Functional Restoration here at Case Western Reserve. And I already gave you an introduction, Megan, so in terms of your background as a graduate student, of course, your time at the FDA, and you heard the story about her being across the hallway as the PMA was being evaluated, and with it, Megan will share some insights on the sustainable commercialization of neuroprosthetic technologies. And following her presentation will be a moderated panel discussion, and she'll be inviting her panelists. And I'll let her make those introductions when the time comes. Please welcome Megan.
Thanks, Joe. Here we go. All right. So today I'll be talking about how we can make neuroprosthetics for spinal cord injury sustainably available. And I've structured the session to give an overview of our latest attempt to move something into commercial reality, the key grip system. And then following that, we'll have a moderated panel discussion from our experts, which I will be inviting up. And hopefully, time permitting, we'll have an open Q&A. So KeyGrip is our next generation system that we are intending for commercialization. Sometimes I feel a little bit like I'm reaching my hand way back 20 years to reach a baton that is waiting to be picked up by an earnest effort to bring something to commercial reality. So I was brought into the Institute for Functional Restoration in 2013, and my charge was to find a commercial pathway for many of the neuroprosthetics that we use here in Cleveland. I had been working toward that pretty diligently for a number of years, but by 2022, things were looking a little bit discouraging for finding a true pathway. And it's hard not to observe, firsthand, that the challenges of commercialization really are formidable. I had been moving several of our technologies along, trying to find industry partnerships and things like that would help bring them to commercial reality, but I could feel how difficult that challenge was. But you can't help but also appreciate that all of the technical knowledge has been established. There's no new science or engineering that needs to be discovered at this stage. And it's also easy to reflect that something like the neural control system really deserves to be on the market today. I mean, every time I would talk to Jeanette or Maria about their system and realize they've been using these things for decades, you can see how reliable it is. You can see how people integrate reliable grasp and release into their daily life with these systems. In many ways, I think neurocontrol was ahead of its time. It was launching into a healthcare ecosystem that wasn't ready for it. And it was launching into clinical practices that probably weren't ready for it. But it's also not the 1990s anymore, and so maybe we have opportunity to think about things differently. So my question to myself was really, if we could try this again, what would we do differently? And a big, part of that for me was to really give myself permission to start with a blank canvas. Hunter has given me blank canvases in the past. When he handed over the IFR to me, he said, make this what you want it to be. And I always appreciate having plenty of space to doodle my own ideas like that. But this was really giving myself permission to rethink the whole problem from the ground up. Because what I really wanted to do was pursue what's called the minimum viable product concept. So this is the idea that you try to make the smallest thing commercializable that you possibly can to test the market and to really stress the market and see how the market responds to it, so that you can build in innovation after the fact. So I began with a basic homework assignment for myself. I had taken previously the NSF I-Corps training, where they tell you to do, dozens and dozens of stakeholder interviews to try to understand how would people approach this problem. Take the problem to them, ask them to help you refine your thinking about it. So the first concepts for key grip came out of those discussions. But then with Hunter's gentle urging or prodding, the foot in the back, as it were, it can't just live inside your head. It has to come out and be socialized with people. And so I brought this to the IFR's Business Advisory Council. I brought it to the upper extremity team meetings. We talked about it within the clinical research group at Metro, just to get a wider view of it. And so my thinking here is just get really smart people thinking about this problem seriously. What is it going to take to commercialize a small neuroprosthesis to restore hand function? So, over 4 dozen stakeholder interviews later, and this is with people with lived experience with spinal cord injury, clinicians, engineers, industry members, regulators, a whole host of different kinds of people, from Cleveland, outside of Cleveland, people who'd never heard of this idea before, get them talking about what is a minimum viable product for hand grasp. And so 2 pretty significant ideas bubbled up to the top in terms of priorities. Oops, there goes my animation. The minimum viable product has to provide reliable grasp for daily activities. That's a given. It has to do the job that we want it to do. But the other criterion is that it really needs to be easy to implant. We heard about this in the earlier session. Being implantable in an outpatient procedure really constrains the problem significantly. It brings up a whole host of other requirements for the product. And so when we're thinking about reliable grasp, we can start asking secondary questions about, well, which grasp patterns are we talking about? How many grasp patterns? Which muscles? How many muscles? How would you have people control the system? When we start talking about the ease of implantation, we're really asking, what's the minimum number of electrodes? How can we constrain this to be the smallest minimal viable product, the minimum number of incisions? Because a lot of this has to do with the reimbursement for these procedure codes on the far end. So thinking about that early in the design specifications. And so inevitably, this involves trade-offs. You can't have everything that you want. You have to have sort of like the critical things. And so the biggest design trade-off is that we're only going to be offering one grasp pattern. And so as we started to socialize this idea, talking to various people, many people identified lateral pinch as one of the most important grasp patterns. It's a very simple grasp pattern. It's what we use to hold small everyday objects for daily activities. So most people were sort of in agreement about this. The big stakeholder group that disagreed are our FES users today. They felt like this was going to be a loss of function, to only have the ability to use one grasp pattern. But I have a couple thoughts about that. First of all, if you press them, they will say, if you don't have anything, having one grasp pattern is still better than having nothing. And the other thought I have is we're talking about the minimum viable product. It's what it looks like today as we're trying to commercialize it and get market experience. It's not the forever design. It's the design that allows you to innovate in the future to bring additional functionality forward. So to me, having only one grasp pattern as the first trade-off still seemed to make sense to me. So the early envisioned key grip product would be something like this, maybe 2 or 3 channels of FES, where you're able to activate paralyzed muscles just to enable this one pattern of lateral pinch, where all the implanted components are located in the forearm so that you're not doing significant incisions throughout the body, where you may be relying on external accessories to do more complicated features, like even providing power or communication to the implanted receiver, a lot like the freehand configuration. There might be a user phone app. There might be a clinician programming system that allows the system to be modified over time. And so when you look at this system, you can see it really is trying to be the littlest thing that you can imagine commercializing. And so when it was coming together like this, it really begs the question, could something already be out there that's already doing this? And here, we get to ask ourselves this question because it's not the 1990s. This would not be a question that folks at that time would have been able to answer any way except in the negative. There wouldn't have been a lot of stimulators out there for people back in the day, but stimulators exist now, so we can ask ourselves, does something like this already exist? And so with funding from the Case Coulter program, we explored 4 different commercial products, comparing their technical specifications to freehand, the IST, and the network neuroprosthesis. In terms of the stimulation waveform, electrode design, the implant technique, we looked at how it was programmed, how it was surgically implanted, the instructions to users, the overall safety profile. And then we talked to the companies to determine whether there would be any interest in doing a commercial or research collaboration. And so where we ended up was with Nalu Medical. Nalu is already a successful company that has 2 commercial products, a spinal cord stimulator and a peripheral nerve stimulator. Both are for pain management. But when we lined up the specifications of their product to what we were thinking about for key grip, they basically met all of the basic requirements. They were a company that was willing to engage with us at the research stage in the form of letters of support, right of reference letters, basic tutorials to the team on how to use the system, how to program it, and their interest in joint IP. Going a little bit deeper on the technology itself, the Nalu Pulse Generator, we like it as is. It basically can do all the things we want it to be able to do. Each of those 2 legs or ports has 4 active contacts that can be independently programmed, and so it's very versatile in terms of how you would be activating throughout those contacts. What we didn't like were their electrodes, because our surgeons enjoy a great deal of success with our intramuscular electrode design, so we've recently undertaken an effort to redesign the electrodes. And this will be a system that allows us to take advantage of the 4 independent contacts by bifurcating the electrode into 2 separate muscles that can now be reached. So that now we can go from a 2-muscle system to a 4-muscle system with modified electrodes. These electrodes, we've gone through 1 design iteration with our surgeons' input, and we're at the point now where we are actively testing them for future introduction to our clinical trial. And this was funded by the state of Ohio. So that was a whirlwind about the technology, but again, we're talking about a very, very simple system. What are some of the other trade-offs that we might expect? One of the things we need to know is, what does it mean to only have 2 or 3 muscles activated to provide grasp? Our research question is, what outcomes can we expect when you only have 2 or 3 muscles to activate? And so luckily, we're able to recruit some of our existing study participants who already have 8, 10, or 12 channels of stimulation to have them come in, have them temporarily reprogrammed to only use 2 or 3 muscles in the lateral pinch configuration, and then look at their outcomes from there. And so we were able to recruit 4 people. And again, this is a project that was funded by Case Coulter. I'm sure you can all guess who some of these people are. You've already met them today. But it still never ceases to amaze me how long people have been users of freehand systems and IST systems. So we have had 4 individuals. 1 person who you met who has bilateral implants was able to contribute to two data points. And so the results look really good. So in terms of force production, not surprisingly, we can get double the force production with stimulation compared to without stimulation. And by the way, this would be our primary outcome measure. So the claims that we would be making as a medical product would be around force production. This is the results of a kind of a grasp release test where we were focused just on the 3 objects. For those of you familiar with the grasp release test, this is a standardized pick and place test where the standard objects are representative of daily objects. But when tested for lateral pinch, only 3 of the objects are used. So this is a little bit of a tight graphic. But what you're looking for here are the white bars that indicate the median across our test sample, showing that there was some improvement. We also had some superstars who could manipulate the objects with and without stimulation. So the current status of this project, it's brand new since 2022. We've raised $1.35 million in non-dilutive funding since 2022. That funding will allow us to support 19 people in a clinical trial over the next 3 years. We have an approved IDE to study the NALU system as is in a clinical population. But as I previously alluded to, the surgeons don't like those electrodes, so we have to undergo the process of introducing the new electrodes into our IDE, and we're hoping to do that this spring, and we're hoping to get to first in human this spring. Then we have plans to introduce some other product upgrades over the course of the year. Again, this was funded by the Case Coulter TRP. All right, so that's the whirlwind of the technology and the state of the project. But what is our intention around commercialization? So the cornerstone of our approach in trying to make this more sustainable is to focus on the value proposition to hospitals and payers. These numbers are a little bit, challenging to, on this graph because on the neurocontrol freehand side, we're talking about sort of inflation-adjusted dollars, what it might cost today to do these procedures and how much the technology might cost. So that's a bit of an estimate. But on the key grip side, these are real numbers for really implanting something like the NALU system or similar systems for pain management. These are class 2, moderate risk medical devices that go in pretty quickly. And so the goal here would be to try to address the main issue about the need for hospitals and payers to purchase these things. And then in terms of other best practices that we envision at this stage for commercialization, I believe that we need to make sure that key grip fits into current clinical practices because it's ultimately going to be the clinicians who drive innovation. They're going to be the ones that are looking at it saying, hey, can you add this new feature? Or hey, our study population wants to use a different grasp pattern than lateral pinch. So we want to make sure that this fits into the clinical practices of the many clinicians that would be touching this product. And that includes therapists and PM&R docs because they are largely going to be the referral pathway. So again, this is something that I think where the freehand was a bit ahead of its time, there was a lot of reluctance to direct their patients to surgical options or to the use of implants, but we see that a lot more now. And so this could potentially be a more readily accepted technology for this group of people. It needs to be a tool that the orthopedic hand surgeons and plastic surgeons who are already doing tendon transfers and nerve transfers to restore function, it needs to be a tool that they can grab to if they're interested in providing their patients with additional function. Of course, none of these groups will be won over just by a origin story. They want to see real data. So getting the clinical trial outcomes is going to be really important for us. We also like the idea of the Centers of Excellence model. This is something that a lot of companies try to do, and Neurocontrol did that really well. Just getting centers that were really good at doing the procedure, having a good throughput of patients, we would be approaching this the same way. So that is my whirlwind tour. So in summary, people with cervical spinal cord injury deserve options for hand function. Key grip fully leverages the many decades of prior research that we've been talking about today. It's envisioned as the minimum viable product for restoration of hand function. It's been designed for commercialization through countless stakeholder interviews, and the commercialization strategy is trying to address known challenges that we've faced in the past. So I want to thank my awesome key grip team. There's a lot of seasoned names there, as well as some newcomers, and I'll thank our funding agencies. Thank you. Can I have my slides back up, or? Yeah, here we go. Okay, so I'm going to ask the panelists to come on up, and I will introduce them. You guys want to make your way up? Yeah. Okay, so Anthony Ignani is the president, CEO, and co-founder of Synapse Biomedical, with over 40 years of expertise in developing and commercializing neurostimulation medical devices. He's been a key contributor in the field. Tony first met Hunter as an undergraduate transfer student in 1980 and started working in Hunter's lab as an undergraduate in 1982, then was hired as a research engineer in 1983. Tony also worked on his master's degree with Hunter as his advisor with his master's project exploring monitoring and control algorithms for the upper extremity system. In 1994, Tony was one of the 3 people from Hunter's lab to spin out the upper extremity system as a founding member of Neurocontrol to commercialize the freehand system. At Neurocontrol, Tony served as the VP of New Product Development and Operations, bringing innovative neurostimulation devices to market. In 2001, when Neurocontrol was closing down, Tony came back for an FES Center picnic and started the process to found Synapse Biomedical. At Synapse, Tony spearheaded the creation of a global enterprise with a mission to build a sustainable organization. Under his leadership, the company successfully introduced the Neurex diaphragm pacing system, improving the quality of life for ventilator-dependent individuals with spinal cord injury. Peter Galen received his BS in biomedical engineering in 1976 from Case Western, followed by a master's degree from the University of Washington. At Case, Hunter was his senior project mentor even before Hunter became a professor. Peter has started 4 companies and has had several good exits. He holds 35 patents with several more pending. His current company, Hemex Health, uses technology licensed from Case Western and has received over $12 million in NIH grants with Case Western. Peter's focus is to have impact on underserved populations. The first Hemex product is a very low-cost, accurate point-of-care test for sickle cell and beta thalassemia that has been used to test millions of people in Africa and India. Peter has remained connected to Hunter's work in his role as a member of the IFR's Business Advisory Council, where he has guided our group's upper extremity FES commercialization activities for the last 10 years. Dr. Michael Moffitt. It was when Mike was searching for BME graduate program that he first became aware of Case Western Reserve and FES, when he first saw and was inspired by an article about the freehand system that Hunter co-authored in IEEE Transactions in BME. Mike visited Case and met Hunter and many others working on applied neurocontrol and was hooked. He did his PhD work at Case in Warren Girls Lab and always enjoyed interacting with Hunter and the FES team. After a brief postdoc at Cleveland Clinic, he joined Advanced Bionics, which had been acquired by Boston Scientific a few months prior. At Boston Scientific, Michael worked with the team to develop and introduce technology and therapy advances in spinal cord stimulation for the treatment of chronic pain. He served as the technical lead of the team that developed and brought to market the Vercise deep brain stimulation system to treat movement disorders. Dr. Moffitt served as director of the neuromodulation research and advanced concepts team for the last 10 of his 18+ years in industry. Dr. Moffitt is an inventor or co-inventor on over 200 issued US patents. In 2023, he returned to academia to develop early stage technologies with therapeutic promise. And Andy. Dr. Andy Cornwell is a leader and innovator with extensive experience in health tech, biomedical engineering, and entrepreneurial development. As the director of the 11,000-seater startup incubator at Case Western, he has transformed the facility into a thriving hub for innovation, growing its tenant base and professional service offerings. He also serves as the associate director of the Case Coulter Translational Research Partnership, where he manages translational research programs, including a $6 million funding portfolio designed to accelerate groundbreaking research towards commercialization. Andy is also part of the founding executive faculty of the Cleveland Neurodesign Program. So thank you, gentlemen, for joining us today. And while we get settled into our questions, you all can enjoy some pictures of Hunter being Hunter. Okay. Okay, so I introduced this session talking about key grip, but really the conversation I'm hoping to have is more along the lines more broadly of neuroprosthetics, and especially those that are intended to restore function to people with spinal cord injury. So we can think more broadly than upper extremity function. And I'm going to try to march us through some content here today, but let's start on the topic of the small market size, because this is something that has come up before when we're talking about trying to reach spinal cord injury. And I'm going to pitch the first question to Tony, because Synapse appears to be the existence proof that the small market of spinal cord injury can be reached. So how did you approach the constraints of a small market? How did you think about reaching customers, and what unique strategies did you take?
Thank you, Megan. Is this okay for sound? Yeah, okay. Great, thank you. And first off, let me say thank you to Hunter for all the years of collaboration and leadership and certainly friendship. To appreciate everything you've done for me, for Synapse, and for the community in general. Synapse was founded back in 2002. It was a spin out from Case Western and Professor Tom Mortimer's lab. Synapse, I was mentioning to someone earlier today that the reason for Synapse is Tom had started a company called Axon, and I thought the Synapse was the continuation of the Axon, so I thought that was a good name for it. But we do diaphragm pacing technology, so this is a device to help spinal cord patients get off the ventilator. And just as an update, this week we did, I think, 5 implants. This morning we did a person that was 3 days post-injury. And we did one in Buenos Aires yesterday and had 2 patients tested in India. So we're doing this globally. It's not just local here in Cleveland. We're spread around the world with this. As you've heard through lunch and other things, I've been involved in this technology for many years, involved with the first as a research engineer in Hunter's lab, and then I think when we started Neurocontrol, I don't know for sure, but I think Jeff was one of the instrumental people in having me come over to Neurocontrol. And one of the surprising things was how upset Hunter was that I was leaving the research lab to go to the commercial side, which really surprised me at the time, but that just an aside there. The diaphragm pacing technology is really based on a lot of the stuff that you've heard about earlier today. The percutaneous electrodes, the same waveforms, the same technologies. And one of the things when I came on board to do this, I realized is that, having been involved with the freehand system for all of those years and working to manufacture that device, I wanted to, I think it was Kip who said it earlier, I wanted to keep it simple, right? So I backed out of the devices that Tom had bought to use the implant and focused on the percutaneous electrodes that were used in all of the previous studies. And we've been very successful with that. We have over 3,000 patients implanted now with this device, and the failure rate is very low. I think someone commented on that earlier. Our electrodes, we do repairs, but we're out there. I think we're producing 10 million breaths per day with this device in patients. So it's been very successful. And I think one of the things that I learned very early on with the technology or with this environment that we're working in, I learned it, watching Hunter, work with Hunter Keith, where's Hunter? Mike Keith. Partnering with a clinician is very important. And my partner in the business, Ray Anders, has come today to listen and provide his support to what we're all doing here. But it is that partnership. It's being able to find the clinician, the engineer working with the clinician to really build something in this marketplace. And what is the marketplace? The size of the market? That was the question that you started with. What is the size of the market? It's somewhere between 300 and 1,000 patients a year, and we're doing a couple hundred patients a year. So we're doing a lot of off-label. But we're approaching that to figure out how to expand into other areas. But the spinal cord injured patients, we're up to over 3,000 patients now implanted with this device. And I think that one of the reasons that we're able to do that is because of our mission, where our mission is to provide a life-transforming device for these people that need them. And there's a second part to that mission. From the outset, our mission was to build a sustainable enterprise. So, I looked at the experience from Neurocontrol, and although Jeff, I think, you had said at the lunch fireside chat about, the business plan in Neurocontrol was to do, 500 to 1,000 patients a year. I think that was a failure of the investors, not a failure of the company. I think that, Freehand and Neurocontrol did some amazing things. We helped a lot of people with the hand system, and I'm so happy to see people here today that are still using it. But deciding on the right market and the expectations of what that market is, I think, is important. And that's the lesson that we learned and put into practice at Synapse. We said, look, we know we're not going to be a 1,000 patient a year company in spinal cord injury. So we developed the company based on, being at the size of 100, 200 patients. And that's about where we're at right now. One of the other important things that we did, and I think I have to read my notes because I don't remember everything I want to say, was putting into our articles of incorporation, here it is, that one of the important things we have to look at in the company, and this goes directly to the last talk with Kevin and folks there about sustainability, that we're a commercial company. We want to return money to our investors, but in our articles of incorporation, Article 7 says that we have to consider, including without limitations and social economic effects to the employees, customers, suppliers, and other constituents of the corporation and its subsidiaries, and on the communities in which the corporation operates. So we have to consider that in anything that we're doing. The board has to consider that we have customers, patients that get our device. We have employees that are important to the corporation, and we have a community that we're working in that is important to the corporation. So, those are all things that we did to address sustainability of the company.
That's fantastic. What you're saying is based on how you structured the company to begin with, its mission, and on the basis of trying to target something like a few hundred implants a year, the goal was to have a sustainable company, and you've done that.
Right.
Yeah.
I think, if I were to put it into, the sound bite, I wrote this down just so I wouldn't forget. We are actually building the business to meet the market. We're not trying to build the market by building the business. And I think that's what Neurocontrol did, is we tried to build a venture-backed business that was going to build the market. We wanted to build, at Synapse, we wanted to build our business to meet the market.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Do any of the other panelists have either comments or questions for Tony, or other things that they want to offer on this topic of reaching small populations?
I think there's a critical point there. I think trying to choose a company and your structure of a company, like a benefit corporation or something like that, where you look at, for medical devices, where you look at all your stakeholders, including the patients, the clinicians, your employees, the community. I think especially if you're trying to do impact things, I think it's really important. And because a normal C Corp, number one responsibility of the officers has to be returned to shareholders. And none of those other things can take precedence over return to shareholders. Yeah. So I think it really drives your company if you don't do that.
But we are a C Corp.
Right, but
we've built into our articles these considerations.
And a lot of states now have benefit corps as
Yeah, I'm not sure if Ohio does yet. Do we know if Ohio has a B Corp option yet? I think not. It does, okay. Okay, good. Thanks.
Megan, can I ask a quick
Yes,
question
please.
of Tony? I'm wondering, Tony, how you guys, I love your tagline, by the way, build a business to meet the market. How does your company think about growth as it relates to kind of viability? You know, publicly traded companies, that's of course very important. You're trying to hit growth metrics. And so I'm wondering how your company thinks about that and what type of a structure that you have that might let you think about it a little differently.
Yeah, so, you know, fortunately, we're not a public company. And, you know, I've told my partners in the business that's not something that I'm really too excited about. That goes way beyond being an engineer and getting to do fun stuff. You know, we have a growth perspective. We want to grow, and we've looked at the technology. We've looked at different areas that we can apply the technology in. As a matter of fact, we're doing an implant, not of our chronic diaphragm pacing system, but of our acute version of the system that we're in trials with in a lung transplant patient later today. So, you know, these things we're still continuing to evolve, continuing to do that. We've licensed additional technology from Case Western. You know, I saw Jamie was in the crowd here somewhere. So we're looking at the CCFES technology from Case Western, and we've actually applied for FDA approval for that.
Any other questions for Tony? So you sort of already soundbited it, but you want to summarize the best practices coming out of this section of the conversation.
Sure. So, you know, certainly finding the right partners to do the job with. I find my bullet list here. I think that's important. Building the business to meet the market. I think those are both very important. Putting the articles and the structure in place at the beginning, at the outset of the company, also important.
That's fantastic. Thank you. I'll try not to pretend like this is just advice back to Key Grip for its future decisions to be made. Okay, I'm going to move us on to a slightly different topic. This is on the topic of designing for commercialization, simplifying complex technologies coming out of research. And I'm going to pitch this question to Andy because, you know, you see a lot of early stage stuff coming through the Coulter program that started out as academic pursuits, and maybe they're at the first prototype stage. So is the idea of a minimum viable product even a valid concept at this early stage, or how would you guide an early stage medical device developer to think about designing for commercialization?
Yeah, thanks. I think it's really critical, especially in small markets, to be really highly focused on the clinical need, making sure that the problem you're solving is at the forefront of what you're doing. I learned that from Hunter, actually, making sure that patients come first. But there's also this ecosystem of providers and payers and caregivers and family members and all these other pieces that also have needs that need to be met. And I think for researchers within the university, we don't usually start thinking about that stuff until quite a bit later. And one of the things we really preach in the education portions of the Coulter program is trying to gain an understanding of those clinical needs. Because the technology that we're developing within the university is typically capable of solving a whole variety of problems. And that's exciting because it provides us with tools to do a lot of things. But part of the key, I think, to being successful early on is focusing very heavily on a clinical problem. And you call this a minimum viable product. I'm a little nervous about using that terminology because in a tech world, that typically means like a software product that you can iterate on every couple of weeks and push out a new version. And because of the clinical and regulatory realities of our business, that's not really possible. So I'm a little nervous about the terminology, but as long as we understand what we're talking about, that's okay. So I do think that that's a really critical piece is demonstrating the piece of the technology that's capable of addressing the most prominent risks early on in a well-defined clinical need. And all of those pieces take a lot of thought that happens outside the lab and the environment. And I think that that's a really important piece of the puzzle is making sure, and Tony mentioned this, and it has come up all sorts of places today, is about making sure it integrates into the clinical environment, making sure that the clinicians know how to code and bill for the procedure, or if there's not a code, how are you going to get one? Make sure that the regulatory strategy is understood by the researchers early on so that we can start designing products that meet, Megan, you mentioned that the main clinical endpoints of the key grip system are force generation. It's not a functional endpoint. It's something you can, well, it is a functional endpoint, I won't say that, but it's something you can measure really readily and build a clinical strategy around early on. I think that all of those pieces need to be present, and as you start thinking about translating a technology from an academic environment into a research environment, you can't miss on any of those pieces. So it's important that we as researchers start reaching out and thinking about all of those pieces to make sure that what you call an MVP is addressing all of those risks while providing value to each of the stakeholders in that chain. It's complicated.
Yeah, I guess, like at least for key grip, I was thinking about it in terms of trade-offs. You can't have everything. But what are you willing to let go of in order to make the product a little bit more viable? Because now you've made it either simpler or easier to manufacture or easier for surgeons to implant, and so things start to slough away. Until you get to really the nugget of what you're trying to do. So I'm wondering too, Mike, if you would have experience from your perspective of just, when you're looking at things that are more getting ready to be commercialized through a bigger company, there must be a process of considering either manufacturability or ease of implantation or that type of thing.
Yeah. So all of those things are considered. Megan, and the concept of minimum viable product is used a lot at a large company. And sometimes, like you describe it, with a vision towards something bigger eventually, hopefully. You have to be careful with that idea, because when something succeeds, then sometimes it gets hard to convince yourself that you need to change it in a large company.
There. And and to Andy's point, there's a regulatory component too. You can't just make a change the next week and the next week, because all of those changes have to be integrated into the
That's
next
right.
release. Yeah. Peter, did you have any other thoughts as well?
No.
Okay. Let's see if I had any other follow-up questions.
One of the things that,
Yeah.
in terms of change, I just brought up another idea that I had is that, as all of you researchers out there, when you're coming up with the research products, you have to think a little bit ahead of how it would get manufactured. Because, I've seen the GRT kit up there a few times now in earlier talks, and I got tasked with the task of figuring out how to build it as a commercial product at one point. And I don't know if you remember, Hunter, but Clayton Van Doren that worked on this, he used trays out of the cafeteria, rubber from ping pong paddles, and things like that, trying to figure out, okay, now how do you turn that into a product? What is, it's
the bill of materials.
The bill of materials. Going back and saying, okay, what are the important features of this? You can't just take whatever you have, whether it's a cowhide to put the shoulder transducer on that someone had, that those are things that researchers do. I don't know if you still have the wherewithal to do that, or not the wherewithal, but the abilities to do that in the regulated environments in research much anymore, but back then it was happening a lot.
Tony, maybe to give another piece of a reality check, how many times or how many iterations would you say you've gone through with Neurex at this stage?
You know, we did a lot of work up front. You know, fortunately, I was brought in by Tom and Ray Anders and Tony DeMarco to make this commercial transition. And so I was brought into the university first, actually university hospitals. I was hired by university surgeons. So before the company was formed, I spent a year searching through the basement of the med school, trying to find all the documentation and everything that was there. And we iterated mostly on the finer concepts of it. You know, the surgical procedure with Ray, you know, refining the tool so that the electrode wouldn't get stuck in the pathway, you know, things like that. So, you know, there was a number of iterations that we did to ease the process of transferring it to other sites. Not a lot of iterations in terms of the concept or the product itself.
That's good. That's good. My other framework of thinking about this is when I was at the FDA and heading up the pacemaker branch, all we saw were changes to existing products. It was just a sea of hundreds and hundreds of changes every year, little software upgrades and little tiny things like that. So yeah, that's helpful to kind of rebalance my thinking about how iteration happens.
I think we're probably at around 20 supplements over 20 years.
Okay.
So.
Well, Boston Scientific had hundreds of supplements to their one PMA that probably went back to 1988, but anyways. All right, we're going to switch gears again and talk about a concept that I brought up earlier in my presentation having to do with fitting the product into existing clinical practice because it relates somewhat to the reimbursement strategy as well. So I'm going to pitch this to Mike. So a successful medical device needs to fit into existing clinical practices, including how patients hear about it as an option or how patients get referred to a surgeon for an implant, and ultimately whether the device is reimbursed. So I feel like it was some of my conversations with you early on that helped frame my thinking around this, but what are some of the challenges within this ecosystem that you've observed in your experiences?
Thanks, Megan. You asked me to talk a little bit about it from the context of DBS and kind of the years that I spent there. So I'll just, by way of quick background, I worked in deep brain stimulation for movement disorders. And I think, Jeff, earlier you said it took from 94 to 97 to get your product approved. We started our cross-functional team in 2008 and launched in the US in 2017 to give a sense for what it can take. And that was in a space or a market that's already established. The other thing I would say is, just by way of context, is deep brain stimulation is a market of decent size, but growing is really important to a publicly traded company, which is why I asked the question of Tony so he could give some context for the group on what we're talking about here. And so it's growing slower right now than is attractive to business folks. And the penetration of the market is lower than would be expected. So coming back to your question, Megan, in terms of clinical practices and how the therapy fits, you know, the company that established the market, I think, did a really nice job. They recognized that they had to work with a couple of different types of physicians right up front. The neurologists had care of the patients, and so they were the ones that were going to be speaking to the patients. It needed to be really important that they understood the therapy and ideally were super enthusiastic about it, so that they would share that with the patients and get the patients excited about it. For Woody from the lived experience session talked about his journey searching for all of these different therapies, advanced therapies that he could go into. I think ideally the doctor that he's working with most immediately after the injury is going to know about the therapy and present it to him as an option. On the DBS side, the company also recognized that they needed surgeons, and And ideally, those neurologists and surgeons would be teamed up. So you're looking for teams of folks at centers that already have the structure that's necessary to move that product through, kind of share it with the patient and move that product or therapy forward. And there are the reason it's underpenetrated is because there are a ton of community neurologists that don't have surgeons, and they're not equipped to program the devices. So unfortunately, most patients that are treatment refractory Parkinson's disease don't get the therapy. So there are important things to consider. Another reason it's underpenetrated is because patients are nervous about the surgery and shy away from it. We heard a little bit about that today in the lived experience session. And Kevin was telling his naming stories by engineers, and Tony, you shared your naming from axon to synapse. So here's my naming story. When we proposed to our corporate folks that we should go into deep brain stimulation, they said, could you have thought of a scarier name for an intervention than deep brain stimulation? Why don't we call it? And of course, they had all sorts of ideas, but it was too late. The name was there and it stuck. I think you need to consider, as we kind of bleed from use and clinical use into reimbursement, we're thinking about the OR time used, right? You're clearly thinking about that in the context of key grip. The bottlenecks that deep brain stimulation has are the long OR time. Mm-hmm. So hospitals view OR time as precious because it's a money-generating asset. And the long programming time. It takes a long time and a lot of neurologists' time to fine-tune these devices, which brings up, in the case of DBS, the companies decided to have the clinicians program the devices and to train clinicians to program devices. In other therapies, like spinal cord stimulation for pain management, the companies take it on. And there are pros and cons with those use models, but those should be thought through and considered so that you choose with eyes wide open, right, amongst the pros and cons that you have. DBS is reimbursed, both the device and the procedures to do it, but it's a little bit tricky. And in the US, to get it to work from a financial perspective and the hospital's perspective, they actually stage the procedure into 2 or 3 steps. So they'll put a lead in one procedure, and they'll get reimbursed for that. They'll put another lead in, and then in a third procedure, they'll put the device in. And there are medical reasons to do that. We're told by the physicians, but it's also the case that in other geographies where the structures are different, they just put it in all at once. So those are things to consider, the device reimbursement, but also the procedure reimbursement. So, demonstrating safety and efficacy and getting an FDA approval is a really important milestone and success. But commercial success, as we heard also at lunch, requires more than that. Right? These other pieces need to come together to create kind of fine-tuned machines at these centers, people that are excited about the therapy, and the reimbursement, of course, has to fall in place.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Do you have any best practices for working with insurers? I think people in the audience might not know that for some implanted technologies, you do your clinical trial to gain FDA approval, but then you sometimes have to go and do a second clinical trial to establish your reimbursement. I don't know if that was the same thing for DBS or... That's the understanding nowadays, that you end up having to finance the conduct of 2 full clinical trials usually.
Yeah, thanks, Megan. In the case of DBS, the reimbursement practices, we just leaned on everything that existed. Mm-hmm. But we certainly saw other startups that were evaluated or acquisitions that had different reimbursement situations, and to just kind of roll that up into how I think we want to think about that is we want to think about reimbursement as early as possible in the process and consider CMS and hospitals as stakeholders that should be spoken to. And one of the reasons is you'd really like to understand what data CMS wants to see to give you reimbursement so that you can bake that into your clinical strategy earlier rather than later. You don't want it to be an, oh, by the way, tag it onto your pivotal study, right? You want it to be thought through and make sure that you've practiced collecting the metrics and so forth that they would like to see.
That's great. So I don't know if there's anything else that you want to summarize. You mentioned making sure that, to the extent possible, working with existing codes, making sure CMS and hospitals are part of the stakeholder base that we're talking to when we're doing all these stakeholder interviews. So anything else you want to add by way of a summary for best practices in this section?
I think we hit most of the points, and it was great to see your slides. You're thinking about a lot of these. That's fantastic in the context of key grip.
Great, thanks. So we'll move on to our last topic, which has to do with financing. Everything runs on money. Basically financing new ventures in the medical device space, and I'll pitch this question to Peter. So what are some of the trends that you've observed in medical device startup funding over the years? How has the financing ecosystem changed over the time that you've been doing startups?
Great, I want to back up a little bit because all of us here have incredible opportunity. We're very lucky. We could actually have an impact in the world that's beyond just the people we know. And so for me, if you don't have an impact and take advantage of that, you're wasting part of your life and part of the capabilities you have. So that's the upside we have. But you also have to do something that's sustainable. And that's a lot of what we're talking about here is how do you actually build companies or groups that do something that work long term? And that's quite hard. And because you have to take into account how do you structure a company, how do you get reimbursement, many, many other things. And one of the things that's really important is how do you raise money? Because how you raise money, where you raise money, is going to really drive what kind of company you have. If you get VCs who want to exit in 2 or 3 years, or you get people or you get non-dilutive funding where it doesn't matter, you can build a very different kind of company. One will let you grow slower, one will let you grow faster. You have to really think it through. So if you look at raising money, I've raised, I don't know, $125 or $150 million for companies. I've done everything wrong. So I'd start off by saying it's really hard. I've never gotten a large US VC to invest in a company. So I failed on that. The first company that I was CEO of, I went and I had 65 investment pitches that I got turned down on. And I changed it after each one that I got turned down. I changed my story, got it better. And the 66th time, I actually got funding. So a lot of this is persistence, being unstoppable, being humble to realize you really don't have a good story. Because my stories, when I look back what I started with, it wasn't a very good story, and it wasn't compelling. So what's really changed is VCs 20, 25 years ago had a lot more control in the world. VCs are kind of scared now. They've been hit by the tech crash in the early 2000s, what happened in 2008. So VCs, they're a business too. They're raising money from investors also, so they're trying to convince them. So you have to think about what's driving them. So I like to think way beyond traditional venture capital. Most of my money I've raised has not been from venture capitalists. It's been from angels. It's been from strategics. It's been from partners. It's been from governments. All sorts of other ways to raise your money. And so I think you have to really think outside the box, because if you're trying to do something that's mainstream, makes a lot of money, is probably software, AI, you can raise money traditional ways. But from a lot of what we do here, a lot of what Megan's talking about is non-traditional companies. The markets are smaller, they're a little riskier. So you have to think differently. Who cares about that? And why are they going to give you money? You get as much non-dilutive funding as you can, tying it together with philanthropic money, and then raising money from people who can share your vision. And that's tricky, because you're going to have to talk to a lot of people before you find people who share your vision. And so I think it's really important to really not be fixated on what works for companies and what you read about, because I think what works for a OpenAI is never going to work for our kind of companies. And so you have to really network, talk to people, try to talk to investors who are friendly in the beginning, who are going to tell you what's wrong and why what you're proposing doesn't make any sense. Because it won't make any sense in the beginning for most of us. And then keep going. Be willing to be told no a lot of times. Because that's my experience, is being told no and then being successful in the end. That company that we turned down 66 times in a row, we sold to Medtronic. So you can be successful, but what we were doing was very different by the time we got done. So that's what I have, Nick.
That's fantastic. Any additional comments? I think we have to wrap up now, but any other comments on the idea of financing? Tony, maybe from your perspective, or?
Quickly, I think it's important to think about what Peter just said in the context of small markets and research. We do a lot of these things, and we do these explorations of the market, and we come out with numbers that are below what would be attractive to a typical VC. And so, we may have a $50 million, $70 million market. And in a traditional VC environment, that's just not the right funding model. And it can be discouraging to go to those funders and try to explain what this is, because they're not interested in that. But I think Peter's point is that there are ways to be successful in those small markets if you're thoughtful about how you approach your fundraising strategy. And so if it's true that the clinical need you're trying to solve has a market value that's, let's say, less than $100 million, that's not the end of the road, but it does mean you have to be more persistent and creative with how you cobble together your fundraising strategy.
You structure your company.
Exactly.
Well, we actually had a couple of VCs in Synapse early on. We've bought them out. They had invested early on for other opportunities that we had and didn't pan out. Unfortunately, some of the 2008 and those time frames and the life of their funds, but you have to go into it knowing what their perspective is. Think of it from their perspective. And even now, we have a lot of angel, what I call philanthropic investors. They share the vision of what we're trying to accomplish. We have economic development investors, Case Western, our the organizations that helped us form. But we have to look at it and say, well, what is it that they want out of this? Yeah. And you're right, though. I do, as CEO, I have a fiduciary responsibility to return and get a return on their investments, and that's what I'm working towards. But it has to make sense in the light, from our context, it has to make sense in terms of the sustainability of the company, so that we can continue to provide those products without fear of abandonment.
That's great. I think we're at time. All right. Well, I want to thank you, gentlemen, for coming up and offering all the advice that you have. Thanks so much.
All right, are you ready to rock? I'll say it like that. Like everybody get excited. For our penultimate session, our keynote presentation is entitled Reflections by distinguished speaker and guest of honor, Paul Hunter Peckham. Introducing our honoree, Dr. Che, I hope you join me on the stage. Dr. John Che is Executive Vice President and Chief Academic Officer of Metro Health System. He's also the Senior Associate Dean for Medical Affairs and Professor of Physical Medicine, Rehabilitation, and Biomedical Engineering at Case Western Reserve University. These long-term colleagues have formed an incredibly productive and fruitful partnership, which began in 1994 when Hunter recruited John to Cleveland right out of his PM&R training, residency training. Over the following years, they've co-directed the Metro Health Rehabilitation Institute for a decade and effectively built Metro Health Center for Rehabilitation Research to what it is today. earning more than $90 million in grants and making the Department of PM&R into a major component of the center as a top PM&R department in the nation in NIH funding. So welcome, Dr. Che. Okay.
Thank you, Joe, and it is truly my honor to introduce my mentor, my colleague, friend, and a dear trusted advisor. Many of us are already aware of his many incredible accomplishments, and many of you know, distinguished university professor, member of the National Academy of Inventors, member of the National Academy of Engineering, and of course, many more. But to me and to many of you, Hunter is a lot more than that. And as Joe mentioned, Hunter recruited me to Cleveland in 1994. I might also add that Mike Keith was a big partner in that as well. But you see, as a newly minted PM&R physician who happened to be a biomedical engineer, I had a little bit of an inferiority complex. In those days, PM&R wasn't exactly a well-respected as a legitimate medical specialty. And it didn't help that during the interview process, Hunter mentioned some idea about transforming muscle fiber from type 2 to type 1, and I said, that can't be true. Well, of course, I failed to read his 1973 paper, and I don't know what in the world was thinking of me at that time. Yet, here was Hunter, already a world-renowned biomedical engineer who was willing to take me on. He said, John, I'll cover 50% of your salary, and I'll train you. And it is with that type of commitment to a relatively unknown individual that I am where I am today. But here's what's actually amazing. I'm not unique. This is what Hunter did with many of you. And that is what we should all be cognizant of. Hunter is brilliant, he's strategic, but he's relational. Hunter, you taught us that as individuals, we're not that smart, but together we can do incredible things. Hunter, you also taught us the imperative of our societal responsibility, especially to the most vulnerable, the marginalized, and the underserved, not only locally, but also globally. Hunter, you have invested well, and you have invested selflessly, and for that, we are all very grateful. Professor Peckham, come on up.
Well, I can only screw this up. So I want to say about John. John's the reason. John wouldn't let me retire a decade ago, Sarah. So let me say something that I didn't write down, but it reminds me of I had to give a talk when I was a senior in high school. Sarah knows where this is going. And Sarah and I were dating in high school, and Sarah was sitting right there, and I was giving this talk, and we had to talk about how we had done things in the senior year, and we had a bake sale. And I looked down there, and I saw Sarah, and I said, "A bake Sarah." And everybody in the audience just... So I'm trying to not look at Sarah, who I've been with for, well, we met in third grade. Let me put it that way. So, okay, back to my script here. I'm between you and drinks, you know. Tough luck. You can handle it. So, I can't tell you how much I appreciate your coming today and helping all of us, and me in particular, celebrate this 50-year journey. This is really important, what we do. It is really, really important. And I want to say some things about the many people who have contributed in many ways. But I have to tell you, first of all, when Bob and John and Ron said they wanted to do this, I just pushed back. How long did I push back, Bob? 2 years? 2 years. I don't think any of us want to have the individual reflection of, because everything we've done has really been, the team. And it's the team. Just having to do this has been, doing the reflections and looking back has been very difficult, because there have been so many people who have contributed in so many ways. You've put your trust in me and given me opportunities and supported me in so many ways, and putting up with me and working side by side and sharing frustrations. And, always coming out the other end stronger and more resolute. And I think that's, Peter talked about persistence just now. It's the persistence that we've had. So in doing this, I'm likely to tear up a couple of times. And I want to tell you that I wrote down a question that Josh Boggs posed to me. Josh, if you're on. Josh did his graduate work with Warren Grill and is now the VP of Research at SPR Therapeutics. And Josh asked me one time after a talk, he said, what do you think about when you're up there looking out and realizing how many people you've impacted? And I remember thinking, no, it's really how many people have impacted me. So I want to talk about the ways that you've impacted me and what that's meant to me. So how do I work this crazy thing? How do I forward this this guy? Oh, this guy. This guy? Okay, so does it have a pointer too? Okay, so I'm really technology savvy, aren't I? Thank you, Bob. Ta-da. So just get this idea. I can't talk about all of you, okay? But look, I got it. So thank you. Sooner or later, I do it by myself, right? But take a look. This was early on. I don't know the year, but look at these. Handsome guy, Tony, handsome guy, Jeff, handsome guy, Jim, still handsome guys, right? But there were a few of us that started out really early, okay, and have been on this train for a really, really long time, 50 years together sometimes, right? And where do I point? Okay, and a little while later, I didn't circle these, but you'll see a lot of the same faces. Laura's on now. Mike Keith is there. Pat Crago, Naloy Badra, Clayton. I think Clayton here. I think Clayton was going to come. Anyway, but so then go a little bit further. Did that go? Oh, wrong arrow. Okay, and this is at the time that Bob so kindly agreed to take on the leadership of the FES Center, and that was sort of toward the end. And you see these same faces. Look at their, we've been together. This is unheard of. It's unheard of in academia that you will have that lasting group of people who are really your family. This is your family. You know their kids, right? I can't remember all their names anymore. Now I remember their grandkids' names, okay? But here, Laura, Bob Ruff, who was the medical director after Byron Marcellet, and so many of you, Pat Crago. But I hope you'll accept the fact that I can't speak to all of you, but it is all of us. But I do need to call out a few people who've been very special to me. So that's the part where I have to take a deep breath. And first of all, my family, most of them are over there. Sarah and Greg and our grandchildren. Sarah and Greg and Indy. Look for you. Oh yeah, my daughter. And her son Hayden, who is a freshman at Ohio State now, and Eloise and Ezra, and Greg's wife Tana, and Eloise and Ezra. And I have this wonderful picture of the grand dogs. I decided not to show them, but now, as I said, Sarah and I met these are the people that sustain you. You know that. They sustain you. And I will say for Sarah, she never told me what to do or what not to do, but she always was there for me and with me. So we dated in high school, through college, married after college, came to Cleveland in 1966. But even with that, she couldn't have known what she was getting into. And I want to give you proof positive because I think that she didn't anticipate that her first act was the week before we were married. And so she had come out here for a job interview. And this job interview was to support me during graduate school, support us during graduate school. And on the way back from Cleveland to Elmira, where we lived, there was a plane crash. Or it didn't crash. An engine went out on a conveyor, the tail dragger airplane, 2-engine, and it was like this. And they had a crash landing. She survived, obviously. Maybe not emotionally for a long time. It took a lot of scotch to get her on a plane. That was the third time that she had a crash landing, by the way. Those of you who know statistics know that that's okay at their individual events. So you're as safe flying with Sarah today as you. Okay, so then I want to talk about Bob and John and Ron and Cheryl. As I said, they made me they made me do this, and really thank them for doing it because it's like, okay, you get together with your friends, right? And you haven't seen friends, right? It's like a wedding, right? The family comes together, right? The family came together. It's like how excited can you be about that? I mean, it's incredibly wonderful to see you. And I want to thank the panelists, of course, and Joe for your moderation. I'm worried about what you're going to say at the end, but okay. And then there's Cheryl's team that Bob had mentioned, Deidre, Lisa, Annie. Thank you guys. I know what you've done. Now, who do you call if you can't get Ghostbusters? Okay, there's the question. Who do you call? Right there. Okay. Ready? 1, 2, 3. Laura. Who do you call? Laura, where are you? No. That's who you call. Everybody that worked with me ever knew, call Laura first. Sarah called Laura to find out where I was. The kids called Laura to find out. We are so hooked at the hip still, Laura. I can't thank you enough. The students once held a contest. Graduate students once held a contest to see if I could recognize my own signature. And so, remember, Laura? and the signature, and I had to judge which one was my signature, right? Well, I thought that Laura's signature was my signature. Okay, so that was maybe dangerous, but okay. So, and then Tom Mortimer. Tom, I'm going to say some more things about you, but I have to say some things about right now to put this into context before I say some things about you later, okay? Yes, that was sort of a yes, okay. So Tom was obviously my PhD advisor, we've heard, and my colleagues, and he really set me on the path and gave me the freedom to find my own way. And, there's nothing more than a young, minted PhD can ask for, is the guidance at the start and the help to get through. And I know it wasn't easy. You had a couple of rebels to deal with, but thank you so much. And Pat Crago is right there. Pat and I were lockstep for decades together and throughout many, many roles with graduate students in research, and he became department chairman in the Coulter program that Andy was referring to, and as the BME chair. And I know that I believe I would not have gotten my PhD without Pat Crago. I'll tell you that. I always thought about Pat as the smartest person. I was talking to Jeff about that, and Jeff was telling me all the things that Pat did for him when he was started out and when he did his senior project and all that. So Pat has been such a great teacher and amazing colleague. My closest colleagues in working on the upper extremity projects, they've been on the stage here. Kevin, Ann, Jim Bucket, not on the stage. Mike Keith, of course, Brian Smith, Ron Hart, Mary Bucket. If Laura didn't know, Mary did. Jim and Mary, got together here. It's almost like arranged marriages, Jim. I don't know. So, Mary Bucket, Jim Euler. I'm absolutely sure there is a special section of heaven reserved for you guys. I know it. I know it for a fact. We heard it today. We know what you did. You know what you do. We know who you are, and we'll find you. They're going to find you. They're going to find you, Kevin. So, and then you've heard from Jeff about the people who started Neurocontrol. Jeff, of course, was, we were lockstep. Jeff, as he said, Jeff lived on the road. He had to pass my house. And we'd ride in together and ride home together. And often when Jeff wasn't married at that time, he'd come in at night and, we'd have dinner, and then he'd rile up the kids, and he'd go wherever he went, right? Is that about right, Jeff? So rile up the dog too, by the way. And I'll never forgive you. No. So, but the first employees of Neurocontrol, these guys did amazing. You know their names: Jeff, Tony, Bob Struther, Julie Grill, Julie Hollander at the time, and later Dustin and Kevin. But these were all people that were trained here, right? They went out and they did this stuff. They did this stuff in amazing time with absolute perfection. And they didn't have any industrial experience, really. So, and they set up incredible teams around the world. Peter Gorman, Peter talked, Randy Betts, MJ Mulcahy, just to name a few. And so I want to just go on, but I'm going to go on, and I am keeping you from your thing. So one of the really beautiful things for me is to see the graduate students, the people who were graduate students with me. I realized that, when I was doing this, a lot of these guys escaped after their master's degrees, but not all. So Lori Miller, Lori Mendelson, June Akers. Oh my God, June, I haven't seen you in 30 years, Krista Wheeler-Moss, Scott Banks, who was early on. I introduced Scott to Krista because it was sort of like the bookends. Here's early and late, right? And I think, you guys should know each other. And Megan Moynihan, who was my advisee. So what goes around, maybe, And then there's I saw Carlos come in. Hi, Carlos. Where are you? So I called them in my notes here my Washington colleagues, right? And these guys deserve really special thought, because I tell all of the young researchers, know your program people, talk to your program people, let them know what they're doing, be a face, get their ideas, show them how it's relevant, right, et cetera. And I don't know how I learned that, but I'm sure I learned that because starting out when we had the neuroprosthesis program and Tom had pulled a rabbit out of the hat with Carl Frank and the first contract program, Bill Heterks came into the neuroprosthesis program shortly after that, became our program officer, and Bill Heterks was responsible for the neuroprosthesis program, the FES part of it, and FNS part, they called it. And Joe Pancrazio came later, Kip Ludwig from NIH, Audrey Kuziak, from the VA now, but I kid, is the person with an open portfolio of anything she wants to do, and I'm sure that's true. And Carlos Pena, who is the division director of the FDA when we did one of some recent submissions in some of the companies that, I guess, Jeff, your company's SPR and all must deal with, right? So, and so they're in this mysterious category to some of the researchers is you'll never know exactly what they did for you, but whatever they did, it was a lot, okay? And don't forget it, damn it, okay? Talk to your program officers. They don't bite. Matter of fact, they drink. No, I don't know that. Well, some of them do. All of them that I know do. Bill guided our work immensely for well over a decade, probably 15 years, and later, as we start the development of the network neuroprosthesis, I'm sure he got excited about that, seeing how we could, because he had the idea of some technologies that did similar things, and it was part of the program, and Joe came on board later on, and I remember Joe asking, he always asked, I went to dinner the other night with Bob and Joe, and he said, he asked something like, I don't know what it was talking about, but what do you need? And it wasn't asking Bob and I, but it was sort of like, what do you need? And it's like, that is the most beautiful question to come from somebody. And I remember exactly, I remembered exactly the time when he asked me that question. We were sitting by a pool drinking beer, but I still remember. And Kip, who came on right after Joe, and they started the translational program, and Kip really put, he put torque on it, right? He stepped on the gas pedal. I don't know, he goosed it somehow, and And that program opened up, and it's what we're all benefiting from. Audrey has always been an incredible, Audrey Kusiak has always been an incredible supporter and willing to give guidance. So it's not just your program officer, it's the people who know, like Audrey knew it was doing work in the pain area now, but knows spinal cord injury. And I think it was Joe that first introduced me to Audrey when we were doing the Neural Interfaces Conference. And there's Carlos Pena, who I just want to say, he's by the way, he's a Case grad, PhD in neuroscience, but was always asking, how could he help, how could he help, how could he help? And I don't know, I want to just go on, and I'm going to finish up in maybe an hour or so. See, because I have a lot of people that helped me, helped us, right? In these ways that you just don't even understand what that's going to be. George Pica. Is George here now? I think George is coming to dinner. But I want to tell you, those of you who've been in graduate school together know how closely you get to one another, and how you kind of mutually survive to get through that whole damn thing, right? Like Pat was for me. And George was another one. George was doing some materials thing with Professor Gibbons, and I used to go to their things because some of the packaging that we were trying to do on implants involved biomaterials and da-da-da. And Don Gibbons was the faculty member that was kind of the expert in this thing. And George was a graduate student, George's MD, PhD. He was doing his PhD part with Don as well. Well, years later, as George has retired from plastic surgery, and has an incredible business, I think the first or second largest business in Brecksville, Ohio here. And he did the great honor of endowing a professorship in my name. The Peckham Professorship, or is it the other way around? Peckham-Pica Professorship. He should have gotten first billing for what he gave. And Kevin is now the holder of that chair. But, you never know what these things, and then Julie Giacono, who couldn't be here, but Julie helped me to start the Institute for Functional Restoration that you've heard bits about, and Megan, who really brought purpose to that. So these are, this is incredible. We have in the IFR, we have a business advisory board that Peter is on, and you heard the quality of the feedback that we're getting from this business advisory board from people like Peter, and Peter, I can't thank you enough. I mean, it's like, you're here from India. You get the award for the longest travel. So, okay. And of course, the research participants and the innumerable discussions that there were. So I know I'm out of time, but too bad. So, but I know if I talk long enough, you don't get to ask questions, see. So, the people, Kim asked me to enumerate a little bit more about this, but I had innumerable discussions with people with spinal injuries, and many of whom became our research participants and really laid a foundation, many of whom didn't become our research participants, and names that maybe only Jeff and Mike Keith and a few others, Hal Dixon, Frank Sergel, Jim Lally, all these guys had working percutaneous systems. And ultimately Jim Jadich, of course, and Jim's sisters, Jim passed away, unfortunately. His sisters were going to be here when there was an illness in the family. Jim's sister, Jackie, was going to be here, and her daughter, Jennifer, they couldn't be here. So these people really guided the thinking. I know you already know that, but I'm telling you too. Okay, so I want to tell you a couple more things. probably a few more things. But it wasn't obvious to me about how to put down and say in words about my career, which is sort of what this is supposed to be about. And, and it's long, right? So you retire earlier. Don't be around so long in one place, right? It's be a little bit easier. But I was sitting over the holiday break with Hayden, my grandson Hayden. Hayden, you'll remember this. At his dining room table. And we were both sitting at our computers. I think he was applying for jobs that he could have as make a little extra income. I was probably bothering him when we were sitting there, and I was telling him how much difficulty I was having getting my started. And you got to love this younger generation, so you got to pay attention to them. You already know that if you have grandkids or kids, but you learn it better from grandkids. It said, you got to love the younger generation. He says, Kappa. They call me Kappa because Eloise couldn't pronounce grandpa. So they all started calling me, she could say Kappa, right? So they all started calling me Kappa, so I'm Kappa, okay? So Hayden says, Kappa, why don't you try ChatGPT? And he pops it in ChatGPT, and out comes this outline. So thank you, Hayden. There are many other things. Hayden just Eagle Scouted this last year. I'm so proud of you, Hayden, for that. I'm proud of all you guys, but that's a grandfather's job. So, so I came to Case Institute. Tom was here. There was a laboratory, the Cybernetic Systems Group, and it was a crazy environment because at that time, all departments had been abolished in the Case, and there were centers. There was no BME department, of course, because there wasn't a BME department. There was an engineering design center, Cybernetic Systems Group that Tom was in, and these guys doing the robotics things that Tom was talking about, other things as well. I was fascinated by what they were doing. This is my second Tom piece. And this isn't at the time, this is years later. This is Loise Vodovnik, who was the postdoctoral fellow working with Jim Reswick. And this is Tom when we brought Loise back. We used to have the speakers, and Loise came back and gave a dinner talk and participated with us in a dinner. This is Loise and Tom plotting the fact that I would be here for 50 years. I'm sure of it. Okay, so I was totally inspired by the concepts of using electrical stimulation to move. That's not what I came to Case to do, but I was totally inspired. Now you got to remember, it hasn't been brought up today, but Tom was already an inventor of the spinal cord stimulator. They didn't patent it. The first one was implanted by a neurosurgeon, his neurosurgeon colleague, Norman Shealy. And so he already was, kind of this natural linkage between neurosurgeon and engineer. Tom chose not to work in the pain area after that, but he was the guy who already knew how to do these things, already had that bug. And I caught this bug, and Tom gave a talk one time about the bug and the way in which you catch this disease, and it's what we all are infected with, I think, here in this room, is this idea of electrically stimulated muscle to restore function. And that came from Tom Mortimer and Loise Vodovnik. Now, thank you, Tom. This was from one of Vodovnik's papers. This is his conceptualization. You see, here's an arm, and there's a brain, and they're disconnected instantly. But the way that they're connected is by this technology, a computer, control system, putting something out there to the muscles, and visual feedback, but there's also a closed-loop feedback in the system. And that was his conceptualization. So I call this the architectural drawing okay? So those of you who have built a structure with an architect know that there is a difference between what the architect envisions and what's on paper. Somebody has to build the darn thing, right? So here's what we've been working on, right? You know, signals, myoelectric signals, wherever they are, shoulder movement signals, and some sort of processing, sending information out to not a zillion muscles, but maybe a few muscles, with some sort of control system that generates generates the stimulation to go to the muscles, and visual feedback. No closed loop feedback, no brain-computer interface. This is hard. All by itself, this is hard. And I'm now going to just talk about, I'm going to go by the fatigue resistance thing, but I want to tell you that one of the things that another thing that Tom did for me is he gave me the opportunity to really, I guess he suggested or maybe kicked, I can't remember. He had a way of getting things done. Sometimes it was kicking, sometimes it was suggested, sometimes it was pulling. I don't think he ever blackmailed me, but probably, maybe. So we set up a laboratory in the spinal injury unit at Highland View Hospital, which was the rehabilitation hospital. And it was a separate hospital. But this was a laboratory, as mentioned earlier, with air conditioning on the unit, sort of on 4B, right? And there were 2 rooms, and one was a laboratory, and the other one was a small office off that. The spinal injury unit was run by its chief, Al Freehaver, and Al hired Byron Marcellet, Henry Bowman, spine surgeon, well-renowned for his innovations in spine surgery, including in spinal injury. Byron Marcellet, who became the first director, medical director, and eventually Mike Keith. And is Mike still here? Where's Mike? There he is. Well, I got to say, it's like, thank goodness for Michael W. Keith, MD. Thank goodness. If it hadn't been for Mike, honestly, the story stops right here. It just ends right here. There is no way that it would have gone on. And no one could have been a better fit for me. And I thank me for him, too. We liked similar things. We enjoyed similar things. We fully resonated. I think we could hear each other's thoughts. I know we could finish each other's sentences because it happened more than once, right, Mike? And it was absolutely perfect. It was absolutely perfect. And it's been absolutely perfect. The head nurse of the unit, the head nurse on the unit was Coletta Hazel, and she decided that if there's some damn engineer to be on our unit, I was going to be treated like one of her residents, and they were orthopedic residents, and I was going to know what the orthopedic residents knew if she wanted to stay, if I wanted to be there, because the head nurse basically runs the world, and so she trained me like a resident, and I worked with OT, PT, social work, urology, all the things, and I learned everything, right? I learned everything. Changing catheters, bowel training, packing pressure sores, the entire deal, right? And so, so I had this, learning experience, sometimes hard, emotional. Those rounds were emotional, to learn about spinal injury. Well, the environment of the laboratory with this air conditioning, it became the meeting place. This is, hot summer days in Cleveland, Ohio, on fourth floor of the B ward. It was hot up there, and So on the spinal injury unit, I saw the need to solve, everyday problems that people had, like flat tire in a wheelchair, or, how do you smoke a cigarette? You smoke cigarettes in the hospital. People with spinal injury smoking cigarettes. You know that, Kim, right? And my lab became the meeting place for this. And I had the really good fortune. I was the same age almost, right? I was 28, 29, whatever, and a lot of these guys were, 25, 26. There was no difference in our age, basically, and mostly males. And, I just identified totally with them because, I think I had done all the stupid things that they actually got injured doing, right? And so, I just listened to them. There was no formality to I didn't run a group or something like that. I just listened. And what they were saying, I understood so deeply the need to use their hands. And I could tell you, I was hooked. I was not only hooked by rehab engineering, the whole idea, but hooked with the idea that engineering and what we could do could change lives. And it changed my life. I'm going to have to fast forward here because I do want to get to a couple things. Hayden's outline said I'm supposed to talk about key moments. That was one of them. They do okay? All right, so Bill, you weren't there for this. You, I think, hadn't come on board yet, Bill, but this is Terry Hambrecht. This is one of these key moments for me. We had been running the Neuroprostheses program, running our contract, and part of it involved implementation of these upper extremity systems with these percutaneous electrodes and all the issues that were associated with that. And some of the research participants, well, many of them were home users of these systems for long terms. But they weren't the most reliable things in the world by any stretch of the imagination. Connectors on the arm, and usually it was that kind of thing, little wires, things that came disconnected and all of that kind of thing, and all. And so we had this group of graduate students. This was one of the best times of my life, and I hope they'll say their lives too, but you can ask them. I shouldn't be around when you ask them. I'm looking at Ron. I think it was a good time for Ron, so I can look at Ron. Yeah. So here's Ron Hart, Laurie Mendelson, Owens helped me. No Owens, right? Randy Carter. Okay, there's Laurie Miller, Mark Johnson, who I thought was going to be here, but not. Mike Keith, others. Terry Hambrecht, Pat Crago. I'm over here in the corner. I want to tell you what this was like. So this was one of the first times, this was like crazy for me. They had all assembled, and I was bringing Terry into the room. And for them, for these guys, for these guys to show, oh, there's Jim Jadich. Okay, to show what they were doing. Each of the people was supposed to talk, the pair of, and they were teamed up with, I can't remember, who were you teamed up with, Ron? Rob? Is that Rob right there? Okay, but they were teamed up together, and so I walked into this room, Terry first and me behind. And I had the same emotional response that I'm having right now. I saw before me this group of people, not just one at a time, but this group of people all together, all assembled together to talk about this. And I thought, oh my God, maybe we can do this. And, you know, it was such a moment, a key moment. And, you know, I wasn't about to give that up. That's it, Kim. That's what I want to say. Just another key moment and a couple more things. Those are apologies, but they're sort of weak apologies, so that means I'm going to go on. So I had the opportunity to work with Dick Stein. And Dick Stein was, I met Dick Stein different places, but we ended up on the advisory board of the Miami project together. And one time we were having a dinner, and Dick Stein said to me, Hunter, I have two people with spinal injuries that really need what you people are getting in Cleveland. When are you going to cut the apron strings? That's exactly what he said. When are you going to cut the apron strings? I said, oh, crap. You know, we're going to keep on doing this just in the lab in Cleveland forever. You know, when are you going to cut the apron strings? Jen, right? So that was the beginning of getting things out the door. You know, it's not necessarily that you know to take the first step. Your colleagues will tell you when to take that step, right? You don't realize what you should be doing, so you have to listen. And then we tried that multi-center trial. I don't know why. We never published it. I think we were on to other things with 5 centers. So we went on to implantable systems. And Brian, by the way, Brian wasn't in the basement. He was on the 2nd floor where civil engineering is now in the Bingham building. But he didn't have anything really. You know, I don't know how he did this, Brian Smith. But in 1980, Brian came on board, and our program really, the implant development really took a big step forward. Jeff entered the picture shortly after that, and eventually we had a colony of dog implants that some of the graduate students were involved in. They were Labrador retrievers, and I always had we still have Labrador retrievers in our family. I love Labrador retrievers, and we ran the colony of chronic implants in these dogs, and I had another colleague. You might know him. He's sitting right there. Next to his wife, Jan, and my wife, Sarah. So, and Jeff said, Hunter, when are we going to do these implants? You've been doing these dogs for a long time. It was another one of these cut the apron strings moment, and it was my colleague, right? It's like one thing from Stein is another thing for Jeff, and, you know, I was paying Jeff. He wasn't supposed to torment me, you know. Well, okay, so Jeff was right. He suggested this, so we did it, because that's what we did. You could fight back, Jeff, but he was always going to win, so, you know, he was right. And I do want to, of course, say something about Jim Jadich. Jim, as I said, he's there. He was there with us for a long time. He participated in, the experiments that graduate students did, you know, degrees happened because Jim Jadich would sit through this and Walter would come in and, you know, and wait and bring Jim in from Akron. And, you know, it was like, you know, unbelievable. What an incredible relationship they had and what a support Walter was for Jim and all. So Jim was, and his dad were both totally selfless. I remember one time, Walter would call us up. Sometimes he'd get back to Akron, and the external system wasn't working. He hadn't even used it. He just drove back to Akron, and the vibrations in the car probably did something or other, or they pulled something, and it was like, oh God, we better get this implant working. So I want to fast forward to the founding of the FES Center, because that really led to some really important things. So and that is how you can engage the community. And Joe, when he was here before for neuroprosthesis talk, I think. Oh, you were at the clinic, right? So APT Center lecture. And we were talking about engaging the community and how we had generated engaging for the community. But when Brian did these implants, right, we did it in a skeleton structure without adequate resources and all. And so it was amazing we could make our devices that were so reliable, and we had confidence in that. We tested the dickens out of them. But we were doing this on a shoestring, and over at the VA, Byron was working with the lower extremity system, and he needed better engineering resources, and so did we. So we began to explore options of bringing these things together, and we did that through the VA Center of Excellence, because we thought, well, this would eliminate duplication and provide common resources, enhance facilities, all that, reunite the research community. It really did, right? All people who wanted to do this came together, and but in that process, we asked researchers, what do they really want, right? I think I learned that from you, Joe. What do you need, right? Well, it turns out, and it's still true today, I think, it's pretty simple. And it's almost a duh moment. A community of people working on like problems and issues, the resources to accomplish their work, especially resources that couldn't be supported off research grants. Clean room manufacturing, regulatory support, media support, medical illustration, purchasing, these things that, they're supposed to, if you get them, they have to be paid for by indirect costs. Don't put them on your proposal, they're going to get taken off anyway. It doesn't belong there. But it's absolutely needed. And so, and the other one, gap funding of my proposal doesn't get funded because I have staff, and I don't want to lose my staff. My staff are so critical to our success, right? True for everybody here that is a researcher. I can't lose my staff. So there was the director of the VA. We went to the VA to Peg Giannini. She was the director. She was really, really shrewd. And she challenged our community to match what she would commit. And fortunately, locally, we had done our work. We'd had buy-in to do this. Well, buy-in ultimately has to mean money. We had agreement at that stage from Case Western Reserve, Cuyahoga County, which is Metro Hospital, Edison Biotechnology Center that you don't know, but they all, ultimately, G said, we called her G, Dr. Giannini, we called her G, challenged us to raise $1 million. From those community organizations, they committed $1.3 million. That was in whatever 1990 dollars there were to put this together. And we all went together to Washington and made our case to G. And she was overwhelmed. They agreed. We sat a year later waiting for the money to come. I'm sure it wasn't in her budget, even though she had committed to us. And we dug, where the hell is the money, right? Okay, so we built these resources, and that was phenomenal because, as you heard today, that allowed us to bring together a community and really focus on our technology transfer program, and that's launched Neurocontrol, and so really some final thoughts. And Peter said this in another dimension for the funding, but it's all about persistence, isn't it? It's whether you're looking for a job Hayden, I guess, whether you're trying to raise money for your Eagle Scout project, right? We talk about persistence. It's so much as persistence and just sticking to it. Stick to it. Don't give up. I came to Cleveland, I think, as a scaredy cat, introverted young engineer. Sarah used to say, you only see black or white. You only see black or white, Hunter, right? And now everything is shades of beautiful gray. So we've met beautiful people from all over the world and enjoyed their relationships. I took a slide out, but I think I'm going to put it in right now. There it is. We had parties in our house. Before this group got so big, we had parties in our house. I asked Sarah, how did we get all the food? She said, "Oh, do you remember that urban feast down on Lee Road? We used to cater that, and Sarah would make stuff, and I don't know. We pulled it off, and our house wasn't that big. But here is one of those holiday parties. Brian Smith, Megan Moynihan, dressed in her favorite plaids, I guess, Megan, huh? Kevin Kilgore, Sarah in the background. This is just it's a Polaroid that was just taken by chance, and I just found it about a year ago. I mean, we've been together forever, and so for you guys, thank you for all that you have given me. We've made the world a better place. I treasure our time together, and I ain't going away. I mean, but you have given me so much, and we have worked together as a selfless team. We've learned from our mistakes, and you'll learn from your mistakes. You have new ones to make. We made a bunch along the way. You'll make some too, don't be worried. You'll figure it out. Times are different, and I'm pulling for you every step of the way. I know that you have an incredible group of young people. If Ron Hart dared to retire, which he did, he knows that Ron Hart, I'm not going to retire without having a team of people that I have trained that are as committed to this as I am, right? Megan, I saw you, the other Megan here. So there you are. She programmed all by herself for the first time, right? Just Wednesday, it would have been Wednesday, and I didn't get to the lab. So you have a team going forward that is going to keep this going and make it work even better, and I am so happy for you. And I wish I had another 20 years. I just didn't like writing those proposals. That was really tough. But thank you all for being here. I really appreciate it. And maybe I've used up enough time that I don't get questions, right?
As soon as I learned that this was going to be an event, I think that, and I think this is true for many of us, you start thinking about what it is you want to be able to express about someone so as remarkable as Hunter. And I think this has been a tremendous day. What's really interesting, and I hope that you heard this repeatedly, is that so many of the same words that Hunter's colleagues have used over and over again. We have two best friends of Hunter, apparently. Let them duke it out, in terms of whether it's Jeff Thorope or Mike Keith. And I think all of us, when you think about Hunter, the first word we think of is friend, okay? And we're very pleased there's so many young people here, because there's an opportunity to learn something about the core of what makes team science work. You heard John Shea refer to one of Hunter's characteristics. He used the term relational. And the thing don't make the mistake, young people. It might be comfortable, or even you might think that the success built the friendships and the relations. It's the other way around. The success that we've seen here and seen as part of this field has been a function of nurturing, building, maintaining, retaining friendships and relationships. So, I got to know Hunter when, I was at the NIH as a program director, and I think you've heard that with the responsibilities for the Neuroprostheses program, which I did not invent by any means. I was an in vitro neuroscience guy more than anything else. Hunter spent a lot of time gently educating me and learning. And I was between two really, I think, exceptional program directors, Bill Heat-Dirks and Kip Ludwig, both of which I have a tremendous amount of respect for. It's great to see friends and colleagues, right? And I'll say old friends and colleagues, maybe seasoned is a nicer word. But, at the time when I was at NIH, it was there was a recognition. I mean, really, this was the time of Zerhouni and talking about this thing called translational research. And, Bob said it earlier, Case Cleveland, this group has been doing translational research before we even started calling it translational research. And there was something else they were talking about. They were talking about the importance of team science. And for the NIH, they said, well, we know how to solve the problem of team science. What we're going to do is have multiple PI grants. Because, obviously this is about getting credit, okay, which it isn't exclusively. If you hear anything today, it's about relationships and why that's so vital. So John highlighted all of Hunter's achievements. So I'm not going to rattle them off again. But Hunter is, I couldn't, of course, he was going to say, and he should, that these awards and accolades and progress in neuroprosthetics were a product of team science. And it's the result of many dedicated colleagues, clinical collaborators, students, pioneering patients and their families who gave their time, energy, and effort to be part of this collective team. Now, but I argue that at the core and the center of it all is Hunter, and we can learn from his example. And I encourage you to learn about the importance of relationships. So we can think and understand that what makes team science soar and really to achieve that clinical impact are those relationships. Now, it's interesting from my perspective, the Hunter recipe has many ingredients, and people have been highlighting these throughout the day. So intellect, passion, I was adding them as I was, of course, yes, passion, humor, aspiration, inspiration, perspiration as well. And nurture, trustworthiness, and humility. You heard that a lot. It's the team, right? Sum total is a leader in team science who is a magnet. I used that term last night to describe, it's true. And that's how you have the sustainability of drawing people together. He's a magnet. And he's been critical to the synergy that we've seen and we've witnessed and discussed all throughout the day. It's interesting. There's one of my favorite poems is If by Rudyard Kipling. Okay, now, Rudyard Kipling, for those who are 30 and younger, was the Lamar, Kendrick Lamar of his time. He was actually quite popular, okay? And I won't read the whole poem because but the things that stand out to me, and I think of you, Hunter, when I hear it and I go back and read it, is these two lines. If you can talk with crowds and keep your virtue, or walk with kings and not lose the common touch. And that, for me, with you, is how I think of you. And it's, with this, you've been absolutely our teacher, our mentor, our friend, our colleague. And, with that, I'd say uncork the wine, get the cheese ready, or whatever the reception is. And please join me in one last moment to clap for Hunter. Okay. Great. All right, to the reception.
Lead the way, Hunter.
Okay.